Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we step into a small medieval vineyard cottage while snow folds itself over the valley, soft as wool and cold as a landlord's smile. Outside, the vines stand in dark rows, their winter-pruned arms reaching through the whiteness like old fingers. Inside, a little fire breathes in the hearth, and the roof creaks as if it is considering retirement. You are about to spend the night here, tucked between barrels, straw, smoke, and the deep hush of a storm. Romantic, yes. Comfortable by a modern standards, absolutely not. You probably won't survive this, at least not without complaining about the mattress, the smell, and the suspiciously confident goat near the door. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell us where you are watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, and let the valley open around you. You arrive just before full darkness, when the sky is neither blue nor black, but the colour of cold iron rubbed smooth by the day. Snow drifts across the track in slow, sideways threads. It does not fall straight down. It wanders, it searches, it slips under your hood, brushes your cheek, and melts there with the tiny sting of winter finding skin. Your boots sink into frozen mud beneath the new snow. Each step gives a soft crunch, then a wet pull, because the earth remembers yesterday's thaw, even if tonight is determined to become a painting of misery. Ahead, the vineyard cottage crouches against the slope. It is not charming in the postcard way, because postcards are merciful inventions, low, dark, smoky, and practical. Built of timber, wattle, daub, stone where stone is available, and all the patient compromises poor people make with weather. The cottage belongs to the vineyard as much as to any person in many parts of medieval Europe. Vines are planted on slopes because drainage matters, sun matters, and grapes are rather picky little creatures for something that later becomes such a forgiving drink. By the later Middle Ages, vineyards are common not only around the Mediterranean, but across regions of France, the Rhinelands, England in warmer centuries, and parts of Central Europe. Wine is not just a luxury, it is food, trade, rent, medicine, sacrament, and social glue. A vineyard cottage like this may shelter a tenant worker, a seasonal keeper, or a small household bound by labour to land that does not fully belong to them. You stand at the doorway and pause, because the scene deserves one slow breath. Below you, the valley fades under snow. A narrow road curves between fields, then vanishes behind a white ridge. Farther away, you can just make out the village, clustered around its church tower. The tower is a dark tooth against the dim sky. A bell might ring soon for evening prayer, unless the storm swallows the sound first. Smoke rises from the village roofs, low and tangled, low, pressed down by the weather. Even the smoke seems tired. Behind the cottage, rows of winter vines climb the hill in rough terraces. Their leaves are long gone. The harvest is memory now. Stored in barrels and debts, in aching backs, in the sour sweet smell that still haunts tools and baskets. Snow gathers along the vine stakes. Some are straight, some lean like old men, listening to gossip. A few are tied with strips of cloth or willow. Simple repairs waiting for proper hands in daylight. You push at the wooden door, it sticks. Of course it sticks. Medieval doors do not care about your mood. The wood has swollen from damp, and the latch is a small iron thing, cold enough to punish your fingers. You press your shoulder into it, and at last it opens with a complaint that sounds almost personal. Warmth rolls out, but not the clean warmth of a modern room. This warmth carries smoke, sheep wool, old straw, damp leather, fermenting grapes, boiled onions, and the deep animal breath of a household trying to share one pocket of heat. It is not unpleasant exactly, it is simply honest. Medieval life does not believe in deodorized mystery. You step inside and lower your head beneath a soot-darkened beam. The cottage is one room, or almost one. A rough partition of boards and hanging cloth divides a storage corner from the main living space. There is a hearth set near the centre or against a wall, depending on the local building custom, with smoke finding its way upward through a hole, a vent, or simply through the thatch because medieval smoke has ambition. Chimneys exist in the Middle Ages. But in modest rural homes, they are not always the neat brick conveniences you might imagine. For many ordinary people, smoke is a roommate, a rude one. Rude. The fire is small, banked carefully, fed with twigs, vine cuttings, and pieces of wood too precious to waste quickly. It glows red under ash. Someone has set a pot near it, and the pot breathes steam in patient little sighs. You hear a hen shifting in a basket. Somewhere near the wall, a small animal scratches. You decide not to investigate. This is called wisdom. A woman of the household, or perhaps the keeper's wife, looks up from her work. A man sits near the hearth, sharpening a small knife used for pruning, eating, cutting cord, and probably solving every problem from bread to minor disaster. A child peers at you from behind a bundle of wool. Everyone takes your arrival seriously, but not dramatically. Travellers come in bad weather. Neighbours need shelter. Workers are delayed. Storms make philosophers of roads. You are given space near the hearth. Not the best space, because you are not royalty, and, frankly, even royalty would struggle to get the best spot from someone who has been cold all day. You remove your outer cloak. It is heavy with snow, and when you hang it on a peg, water begins to drip onto the floor in slow taps. Tap, tap, tap. The sound joins the fire, the wind, the soft breathing of bodies, and the occasional offended cluck from the hen. You rub your hands together. Your fingers ache as they thaw. That ache is sharp at first, almost bright, then slowly dulls into warmth. The cottage floor is packed earth, swept but never truly clean. Rushes or straw may be scattered in places, though in a poor cottage these are not the fragrant. Constantly refreshed rushes of a noble hall. They are practical bedding, insulation, and, occasionally, a thriving little republic for fleas. A quirky medieval tidbit for your sleepy mind. People sometimes used aromatic plants like lavender, sweet woodruff, or meadowsweet in richer homes to sweeten rooms and discourage pests, though the success rate was probably somewhere between pleasantly hopeful and the fleas are laughing. You crouch close to the fire and listen. The storm thickens outside, snow taps against the shutters, then slides down. Wind moves across the roof in long strokes, like a hand smoothing cloth. The thatch above you is thick, layered from reeds or straw, tied and packed to shed rain and hold warmth. It can last years if maintained. Though snow is heavy and leaks are not unusual, you glance upward at the dark underside of the roof. Little threads of straw hang down, soot clings everywhere. The cottage smells like winter has been smoked for preservation. Historians still argue whether cottages like this felt primarily crowded and uncomfortable to their inhabitants, or whether the closeness of people, animals, work, and fire created a sense of security that modern observers underestimate. Both can be true. Of course, humans are complicated. A room may be smoky, cramped, and full of fleas, while also being the one place in the valley where you are not freezing to death. Comfort is sometimes less about softness and more about not being outside. You turn your face toward the doorway, now closed and barred. Beyond it, the storm moves through the vineyard rows. You imagine the vines standing in silence, each root buried in frozen soil, each branch holding snow. The year is asleep in them, sap withdrawn, fruit gone, leaves fallen. Yet the vineyard is not dead. It is waiting, which is a very medieval thing to do. Peasants wait on weather. Workers wait on lords, monks wait on prayers, debtors wait on mercy, and everyone waits on spring. The household returns to its small tasks. A wooden bowl is moved. A cord is tied. Someone murmurs a phrase you do not fully catch. The child stops staring at you and begins staring at the fire instead, which is fair. The fire is more interesting and probably less confusing. You sit with your back against a rough wall. The daub has a coldness that seeps through your tunic, so you shift closer to a bundle of straw. Your body begins to understand the rules of this place. Keep heat close, waste nothing. Listen before speaking. Trust the fire, but not too much. Trust the roof, but keep an eye on it. Trust the night only because dawn has happened before. Outside. The church bell finally rings. The sound arrives softened by snow, not loud but round and distant. One note, then another, spreading across the valley like ripples under ice. It marks time in a world before clocks are common in ordinary homes. Time here is bells, prayers, meals, light, labour, and the behaviour of animals who seem to know more than they admit. You breathe in. Smoke, damp wool, wood ash, sour wine, snowmelt, human warmth. The door is shut, the valley is white, the cottage holds, and as the storm gathers itself for a long night across the slopes, you remain beside the hearth, still thawing, still listening, while the last grey light fades from the vineyard outside. The warmth of the hearth begins to work its way into you. Not all at once, but in careful little negotiations with your bones. Your shoulders loosen first, then your knees remember they are not made entirely of frozen rope. Your hands, still red from the doorway and the iron latch, hover near the fire until the skin prickles, and you pull them back because even comfort has boundaries. Someone shifts the pot closer to the coals. The evening meal is not presented with the ceremony. There is no grand announcement. No polished table, no silver plate gleaming under candlelight. This is a vineyard cottage in winter, and supper arrives the way most useful things arrive quietly, practically, and with the faint sense that everyone should be grateful it exists. A wooden ladle dips into the pot, steam rises. The smell is humble but deeply persuasive after a walk through snow. Onions, beans or peas, perhaps cabbage, a little barley or oats, herbs if the household has them, and maybe a scrap of salted pork if fortune has remembered this place. You receive a wooden bowl, it is warm in your hands. The pottage inside is thick, brownish, greenish, and not especially photogenic. Medieval food often suffers from this problem. It has no interest in looking good for a tiny glowing rectangle, but it is warm, filling, and honest. You lift it carefully and breathe in the steam. It smells of earth, smoke, salt, and long patience. You taste it. The first spoonful is plain, then better, then quietly wonderful because your body understands survival better than your imagination does. Bread comes next. It is dark, coarse, and dense, made from rye, barley, maslin, or mixed grains, rather than fine white wheat. Fine white bread is for people with softer hands and more impressive problems. Your bread has a firm crust and a chewy interior, and when you dip it into the pottage, it softens enough to become almost tender. The household eats slowly, not from daintiness, but because food is measured. Nobody attacks the bowl like a banquet guest in a painting. Winter teaches restraint, and winter is an extremely strict tutor. A mainstream historical fact settles beside you as naturally as the smoke pottage was a daily staple for many medieval rural households across Europe. It could change with region, season, and wealth, but the basic idea of a simmered mixture of grains, legumes, vegetables, and occasional meat was common, because it stretched ingredients and warmed the body. It was not glamorous, but glamour is overrated when the wind is trying to peel the roof off. The fire pops. A tiny spark leaps and vanishes. Near the doorway, your wet cloak drips more slowly now. The hem steams faintly. The cottage air thickens as damp cloth. Cooking, breath, and smoke mingle together. If modern comfort is about fresh air and clean sheets, medieval comfort is often about shared heat and not being alone in the weather. The room becomes a little cloud of human existence. You're inside it. There is no escaping the smell, so your mind wisely decides to call it atmosphere. The man by the hearth passes around a small cup of watered wine, perhaps thin and sharp, perhaps from the last pressing, perhaps better in memory than in the mouth in vineyard regions. Wine can be ordinary drink as well as trade good, but ordinary does not mean careless. Wine represents labour, land, climate, barrels, taxes, saints' days, market roads, and the constant threat of spoilage. A cup of it in winter has a taste of the past autumn, of grapes crushed by feet or press, of skins and stems, of hope fermented into something useful. You sip. It is sour enough to wake your eyebrows, but warming after a moment. Medieval people often drank ale, beer, cider, wine, or watered forms of these depending on region and availability. Water was certainly consumed too, despite the popular myth that everyone avoided it completely. Still, fermented drinks had calories, flavour, and social meaning. They could also be safer in some contexts. Though let us not pretend every cup was a miracle of sanitation. Your stomach, already negotiating with the pottage, chooses optimism. The child beside the wool bundle watches you taste the wine and seems quietly entertained by your face. You try to look as though sourness is exactly what you hoped for. This is diplomacy. A small dog emerges from under a bench. It has the confident expression of an animal who knows exactly where crumbs fall. It sniffs your boot, decides you are not edible, and sits near your knee anyway. You break off the smallest edge of bread and hesitate. Feeding someone else's dog may be rude. Not feeding a staring dog may be emotionally impossible. The dog solves the dilemma by placing one paw on your foot. Medieval negotiation at its finest. The woman at the hearth says something mildly scolding, but not severe. The dog looks away with theatrical innocence. You keep the bread. For now. A quirky tidbit drifts into the evening like a little ember in some medieval households. Stale bread trenchers or thick slices used as plates might later be given to the poor, to servants, or to animals, depending on setting and status, in a humble cottage. Though, bread is too precious for theatrical tableware. It is food, it is spoon, plate. And in Jean's policy all at once, crumbs matter here. Even the dog knows. The storm presses closer. Snow sweeps against the shutter in soft bursts. The sound is not dramatic at first. It is more like a hand brushing flour from a table. Then the wind rises, and the whole wall gives a faint shudder. Nobody in the cottage reacts much. That tells you two things. First, this is normal enough. Second, panic wastes warmth. You're offered a place to sit on a low stool, roughly made, slightly uneven. It rocks under you in a way that suggests either medieval carpentry or personal judgment. Around you, the household arranges itself according to warmth, status, work, and habit. The oldest person gets a better place, the person tending the pot controls the rhythm. The child is kept near enough to be watched. The dog moves wherever crumbs and ego permit. There is no separate dining room. Work, eating, sleeping, storage, and animal care blur together. The cottage is not a collection of specialised spaces like a modern home. It is one breathing machine for survival. Here, a bench may be a seat, a bed, a work surface, and a place to store things underneath. A chest may hold clothing, documents, tools, or treasured scraps. Hooks on the wall carry cords, baskets, cloaks, pruning knives, and whatever else must be kept from damp. Paws, and small curious hands. You notice the bedding piled along one wall. Straw, a rough mattress, woolen blankets, perhaps a cloak rolled for extra warmth. Sleep is not yet here, but its materials wait in plain sight. In this cottage, bedtime is not a retreat to privacy. It is a rearrangement of bodies around heat. People sleep near one another because heat is precious. They may share bedding. They may keep animals close. They may sleep in clothing. They may wake often. The idea of a perfectly silent private bedroom is so far away it may as well be a fairy kingdom with indoor plumbing. Historians still debate how much privacy ordinary medieval families expected inside small rural homes, and whether modern discomfort with shared sleeping tells us more about ourselves than about them. Some evidence suggests people valued modesty and personal boundaries, but the material limits of small dwellings meant those boundaries were flexible, negotiated, and sometimes extremely thin. A hanging cloth might create a world. A turned back might become a door. The fire is fed again with vine cuttings. They burn quickly, snapping and flaring, releasing a faint dry sweetness beneath the smoke. Old prunings are useful fuel, especially in a landscape where woodland rights may be restricted and every stick has a destination. You watch the flames catch the twisted vinewood. For a moment the fire brightens and shadows leap up the walls. The beams above seem to move, tools become strange shapes. The child's face glows gold, then brown, then gold again. The pottage settles in your stomach. The room begins to soften. You hear chewing, swallowing, the scrape of wood against bowl, the little sigh of someone who has been cold all day and is finally warm enough to feel tired. Outside, the valley disappears completely. There is no longer a road, no visible village, no vineyard rows beyond the nearest stakes. There is only the cottage, the storm, and the small circle of firelight holding back the dark with admirable stubbornness. A last piece of bread passes from hand to hand, no one wastes it. You hold your bowl until the heat fades from the wood. A few thick traces of pottage cling to the bottom, and you wipe them clean with bread because washing is work and food is food. The dog notices this with professional disappointment. Then the bowl is taken from you. It joins the others near a bucket and a cloth. They will be cleaned simply, perhaps with water, scraping, sand, ash, or whatever the household uses. Nothing is effortless here. Every object has a second task waiting behind the first. The pot must be preserved, the fire must be banked, damp clothing must be turned, bedding must be shaken, the door must be checked, the animals must be settled. Sleep, when it comes, must be earned in small gestures. You shift closer to the hearth as the household begins its evening rearrangement. Straw is pulled out and spread. Blankets are unfolded. The smoky warmth lowers itself around you like a rough cloak. Somewhere under the roof, a drop of melted snow finds its way through and falls into the dark with a soft tick. Nobody looks surprised. The night has only begun, and already the cottage is teaching you its first lesson. Comfort is not softness, not stats, not cleanliness in the modern sense. Comfort is a bowl held in cold hands. It is bread saved and shared. It is smoke that stings, but also preserves warmth. It is a roof that complains but still stands. It is the knowledge that outside, the snow is wandering the vineyard rows, while inside, for now, you have a place near the fire. When supper has settled into the room and the bowls have been scraped clean, the cottage does not become still. It simply changes its kind of movement. The quick work of eating gives way to the slower work of evening. The careful checking of things that must survive until morning. The fire is nudged, the pot is moved aside, and someone lifts the wooden bar from the door just long enough to peer out into the storm. Cold rushes in at once, it enters like it owns the place. The flames bend low. The dog retreats under the bench with the expression of a betrayed nobleman. You draw your cloak tighter. Though it is still damp at the edges, outside the snow has thickened, and the little path beyond the threshold has almost vanished. Yet there is work to notice, even now, because a vineyard in winter is never truly abandoned. It sleeps, yes, but it sleeps like an old farmer with one eye open. You step to the doorway and look out. The vineyard rows climb away into the white dusk. The vines are bare, dark, and low, tight as stakes or trained along simple supports depending on local habit. Some are ancient-looking, with twisted trunks like knuckles. Others are younger, thinner, more vulnerable beneath their crust of snow. In the growing season, this slope would be green and busy, alive with leaves, insects, voices, and the sharp, sweet smell of ripening grapes. Now it feels like a place after a feast. The table cleared, the guests gone, the servants left with the mess and the bill. You follow the man a few steps outside, not far. No one is making a heroic expedition. This is not the moment for a brave walk across the valley. Unless your dream is to become a cautionary tale told beside this very fire, you only go to the nearest row, where a broken tie flaps in the wind and a stake has loosened. He carries a small knife, cord, and a bundle of withies, flexible shoots used for tying. You hold the lantern, or rather a little covered light that behaves less like a lantern and more like a nervous firefly with responsibilities. The snow falls across the glow in silver streaks. Your breath clouds the air. The work is simple to watch and hard to do with cold fingers. The man brushes snow from the vine, checks where the wood bends, and reties a cane so it will not snap under the weight. He does not prune heavily now in the storm, though winter pruning is part of the vineyard year. Vines must be cut back during dormancy, so their energy can be guided into fruitful growth later. The exact timing depends on region, weather, labour demands, and local knowledge. But the principle is old and stubborn: cut carefully now, hope generously later. That is the mainstream historical fact tucked into the snow tonight. Medieval viticulture required skilled seasonal labour. Workers dug, hoed, manured, pruned, tied, harvested, pressed, and guarded vines through a year of tasks. Wine did not simply appear in barrels because monks smiled at grapes. It came from hands, backs, weather, and worry. You stand among the rows and feel how exposed the slope is. The wind has more room here than inside the lane. It slides along the terraces and pushes snow against your legs. Somewhere below, beyond the white veil, the village is hidden. The church bell no longer reaches you. The cottage fire behind you is now only a dull orange patch through the doorway. Suddenly, the room you found smoky and cramped seems luxurious, which is a useful correction of attitude. A few vine cuttings lie stacked beside a wall, ready for fuel or other uses. Nothing from the vineyard is wasted if it can be helped. Cut wood may warm the hearth. Grape skins after pressing can feed animals, fertilize fields, or become part of later fermenting experiments depending on region and need. The vineyard is not just a field. It is an entire system of use, reuse, patience, and mild anxiety. A quirky little tidbit waits here among the vines in some medieval and early modern wine regions. People spread strange mixtures on vines or in cellars, including ashes, dung, herbs, and even charms, hoping to protect crops from pests, frost, or unseen influences. Did every method work? Absolutely not. Did that stop anyone from confidently doing it anyway? Also absolutely not. Humanity has always had a talent for looking at a vulnerable plant and saying, perhaps some mysterious paste will fix this. The man checks another stake. You lift the light. The vine shadows twist across the snow like writing you cannot read. In the storm, the vineyard feels almost like a sleeping animal, ribbed and breathing under white fur. You begin to understand why land could be loved and feared at the same time. A bad frost, a hailstorm, a rot, a war party passing through, a law demanding dues, a priest expecting tithe, a trader offering a poor price. Any of these could turn a year's labour into a lesson in humility. Medieval vineyards could belong to monasteries, nobles, towns, bishops, or smallholders, though arrangements varied widely. A humble worker in a cottage like this might not own the vines he tends. He may owe labour services, rent, shares of produce, or payments in coin. The vines before you might be his responsibility without being fully his possession. That is a delicate kind of attachment. Imagine caring for each plant all year, while knowing someone else will claim the best measure of the harvest. Gentle, sleepy thought, naturally. Historians still argue whether medieval vineyard workers were mainly oppressed by these obligations or whether some found real opportunity in specialised wine labour, especially in regions where skill could bring status or bargaining power. The answer depends on place, century, lordship, market access, and luck, that unreliable little creature. A skilled pruner was not the same as an untrained field hand. Wine regions could create knowledge communities, where people understood soils, slopes, tools, weather signs, and the moods of grapes with remarkable intimacy. You look down at the soil beneath the snow. It is stony, because vines often tolerate poorer soils where grain might struggle. Too much richness can make leaves rather than fruit. A slope gives drainage and sunlight, but it also gives erosion, aching legs, and a daily reminder that gravity is not your friend. In warmer months, workers would carry baskets, tools, manure, water, and cuttings along these rows during harvest. Grapes might be gathered quickly to catch ripeness before rot. Rain or hungry creatures interfere. Everyone would be tired, everyone would smell faintly of crushed fruit. The wasps would be unbearable little aristocrats. Now the wasps are gone, and the cold owns the air. The man straightens and gestures back toward the cottage. Enough, the rest can wait. Medieval people are practical, and practicality includes knowing when the weather is bigger than you. You turn carefully, because the snow hides stones and old roots. Your boot slips once. Your heart performs a small dramatic leap. Nobody comments, which is polite, though the dog watching from the doorway may be judging you. As you return, you pass close to a low shed or lean-to where tools are stored. A hoe, a mattock, baskets, coils of tying material, perhaps a simple wooden sledge or frame for carrying loads. Iron is valuable, so blades are maintained. Handles are repaired. Tools are personal in the way that frequently used things become part of the body. You can imagine hands smoothing the same grip year after year. Inside the cottage, warmth receives you with smoky impatience. The door is barred again. Snow melts from your boots onto the packed floor. Your cheeks burn from the cold. The woman near the hearth gives the man a glance that says the storm did not need his company. And he answers with a shrug that says vines do not retire themselves. This entire marriage, or partnership, or working household arrangement may contain 1,000 such silent conversations. You return to your place by the fire. The smell of the vineyard has followed you in. Wet wood, cold bark, snow, earth, and that faint sour trace of old grapes clinging to tools and clothing. It mixes with pottage steam and smoke until the cottage seems to hold the whole agricultural year in one breath. Spring, hope, summer labour, autumn harvest, winter endurance. The fire snaps around a piece of vinewood. You remember the rows outside, dark beneath the snowfall, and the way the man's fingers moved quickly despite the cold. This is not picturesque idleness. This is maintenance. The hidden labour behind any romantic glass of medieval wine. Every cup has a hillside in it. Every barrel has winter tied into its hoops. Every vine outside is waiting for someone to return when the storm has passed. The household begins to settle again, but your mind stays briefly among the rows, following the buried lines of the vineyard under snow. The slope is quiet now, the repaired tie holds, the loose stake stands a little straighter, and beyond the shutter, where the night has deepened over the valley, the vines keep their long patience, gathering cold around themselves while the cottage gathers warmth around you. The firelight steadies again after the brief opening of the door, and the cottage resumes its small breathing. Snow whispers at the shutters. The dog curls tightly beneath the bench, having decided that all outdoor vineyard matters are beneath his office. The child leans against a folded blanket, blinking slowly, caught somewhere between curiosity and sleep around the hearth. Hands continue moving because evening rest in a medieval household is rarely complete stillness. A thread is twisted, a strap is checked, a cup is wiped clean, a heel is nudged closer to warmth. Then the man lifts a short plank from the floor. At first you think it is only a loose board. Another charming feature from the grand architectural school of please do not step there. But beneath it is a dark opening, squared off with stone and timber. Cold air rises from it. Not outside cold, sharp and windy, but underground cold, damp and mineral with a smell of earth, wood, old fruit, and something sour that clings to the back of the throat. The cellar waits below. It is not large. This is no grand monastic wine vault with rows of handsome barrels and solemn arches. It is a storage pit, a small underfloor space, perhaps reached by a ladder or a few rough steps, tucked beneath the cottage where the earth keeps a steadier temperature than the storm-tossed room above. In a winter vineyard cottage, such a place matters. It holds what must not freeze too hard, spoil too quickly, be stolen too easily, or be chewed by creatures who consider human planning a personal challenge. You are handed the small light again. Naturally. You've been promoted from guest to human candle holder, one of history's most ancient and underappreciated professions. You lower yourself carefully into the opening. Your boot searches for the first step, finds it, then complains. The air changes as your head sinks below floor level. The warmth of the hearth slips away. The sounds above become muffled, softened by boards and earth. The storm is still present, but distant now, like a rumour told through a wall. Down here, the smell is stronger. Barrels sit along one side, small and dark, bound with hoops. Some may hold wine, others may hold vinegar, cider, ale or stored water, depending on what the household produces and uses. Jars stand near them, sealed with cloth, wax, pitch, or clay where possible. A basket of onions rests in a dry corner. A bundle of dried herbs hangs from a peg. There may be apples wrapped in straw, beans in a sack, hard cheese tucked away from damp, and perhaps a precious strip of salted meat. These are not decorations, they are winter. A well-established fact from medieval rural life is that storage shaped survival as much as production did. Growing food was only half the task. Keeping it through cold, damp, pests, mould, theft, and hunger was the other half, and often the harder one. A good harvest badly stored could become a cruel joke by February. A poor harvest carefully managed might just carry a household through. You crouch beside one barrel and rest your fingers on the wood. It is cold, slightly damp, and faintly sticky near the bung. The barrel is not perfect. Medieval cooperage is skilled work. But wood moves. Hoops loosen. Seams weep. Wine is alive in a troublesome way. Always changing, always threatening to sour, cloud, leak, or turn into something that makes everyone stare sadly into their cup. The cellar is quiet, but it is not inactive. Fermentation, storage, evaporation, and spoilage all work in the dark, invisible as gossip. The man taps the side of the barrel and listens. A hollow note answers. You do not know what it means, but he does, or at least he seems to, and confidence is half of rural expertise. He checks the seal, wipes a little dampness away, and smells his fingers. The expression on his face is not delight, but it is not grief either. Acceptable. Then, medieval quality control often begins with the nose and ends with a prayer. A strange little detail from the world of old wine. Keeping people sometimes tried to improve or protect wine with additions that sound alarming to modern ears, including herbs, spices, honey, resin, egg whites for clarifying, and in some later or regional practices, substances meant to correct colour, taste, or stability. Not every experiment was wise, some were practical, some were hopeful. Some belong in the category of please do not try this at home, or in your historically themed kitchen. The cellar wall is rough stone where the slope gives stone easily, or packed earth reinforced with timber. Moisture glints in tiny beads. A spider has built a careful web between two pegs, perhaps the most organised resident of the cottage. You notice a few marks cut into a wooden stave or scratched near a shelf. They may count containers, payments, days, measures, or simply remind someone of what belongs where. Not everyone in a household reads writing, but marks, cuts, notes, and memory can form a practical record. Above you. A footstep crosses the floor. Dust drifts down. You look up into the square of warm light, where smoke curls and faces pass briefly overhead. The division between upper room and cellar feels like the division between daily life and hidden worry. Above, people eat, speak, warm themselves, and prepare for sleep. Below, the future is stacked in barrels and sacks, quietly asking whether it will be enough. Experts continue to disagree about how much wine ordinary rural workers consumed in vineyard regions compared with how much they sold, owed, or surrendered as rent and tithe. The answer shifts from place to place. Some households likely kept thin or lower quality wine for themselves, while better produce went to landlords, monasteries, markets, or town buyers in other settings. Wine was a regular household-y drink either way. The barrels down here are never just barrels, they are obligations wearing wooden or even coats. You pass the light over a small jar. Inside, something dark and thick clings to the sides. It might be a preserved fruit preparation, a medicinal syrup, or a reduced grape must, sweetened by boiling. Medieval people enjoyed sweetness when they could get it, but sugar was costly in many areas, and honey had its own value. Grape must could be cooked down in some traditions to make a sweetener or flavouring. The smell. When the woman above asks for the jar and it is opened briefly, is deep and raisin-like for one lovely second. The cellar smells almost luxurious. Then the sour barrel reasserts itself. Fair enough. You shift your knees on the packed earth. It is not comfortable, but it is fascinating. Every object seems to tell you that medieval winter is a long conversation with scarcity. The onions are counted, the beans are guarded, the wine is watched, the dry wood is saved, even the darkness is useful, because cool shadow can preserve what warmth would ruin. In the far corner, something rustles. You freeze. The man does not. He reaches toward they sound with the resigned patience of someone who has met many mice and has not found them spiritually impressive. A little movement flickers behind a basket. Mouse. Probably. Rat. Possibly. Demon of poor storage. Emotionally, he shifts the basket, mutters, and checks the sack beside it for gnawing. Grain and dried goods must be protected fiercely. Cats. Traps. Careful hanging, sealed chests, and constant vigilance all matter. The battle between household and rodent may be one of the longest wars in human history, and the rodents are disturbingly well supplied. You remember the dog upstairs and decide he is perhaps not the true guardian of the cottage. His gifts lie elsewhere, such as crumb surveillance. The man chooses a small jug and fills it from a barrel with careful movements. The liquid runs dark in the low light. Some will be taken upstairs, perhaps warmed, watered, or used in cooking. The jug is stoppered, wiped, and handed up through the floor opening. Hands receive it above. The moment feels practiced, ordinary, almost ritual. Down here is the stored season. Up there is the living hour. Before climbing out, you look once more around the cellar. The barrels sit like sleeping animals, the jars glimmer dully. The hanging herbs make faint shadows on the wall. The air is cold enough to calm the skin after the smoky room above. But after a few minutes it begins to creep through your sleeves and settle at your back. You understand why the cellar is visited, not inhabited. It is useful, yes, but it is not kind. You climb toward the square of firelight. The room receives you with a wash of heat, smoke and voices. Your face warms, your eyes sting. The floor plank is lowered back into place with a solid wooden thump, closing the dark beneath you. The cellar disappears, but its presence remains under every step. A hidden stomach beneath the cottage, digesting autumn into winter survival. The jug is placed near the hearth. Someone checks the door again. Someone folds a blanket. The storm moves over the valley with a low, patient sound, and beneath you, in the cold dark, the barrels keep their secrets, the onions keep their sharpness, the mice keep their ambitions, and the winter stores wait quietly for morning. The plank settles into the floor, and with it the cellar becomes a secret again. You know it is there now, cold and close beneath your feet, but the cottage asks you to return your attention upward, to the world of smoke, rafters, thatch, and weather. The storm has grown heavier while you are below. Snow no longer merely brushes the shutters. It presses. It gathers along every ledge and seam. It leans against the walls with the quiet determination of someone who has no appointment except inconvenience. The roof answers first. A creak moves through the beams above you, slow and wooden, like an old back being stretched after a long day. No one screams. No one leaps up. The household only listens for a moment, measuring the sound with the calm alarm of people who understand buildings as living things. A medieval cottage is not a sealed box. It breathes, shifts, leaks, settles, swells, dries, and complains. Tonight it complains often. You look upward. The thatch is dark inside, blackened in places by smoke. Above it, layer upon layer of straw or reed is packed and tied, sloping down to shed rain and snow. Thatch can be wonderfully insulating when maintained well. It can also rot, attract small visitors, and turn dramatic in a fire, which is one reason sparks are treated with respect. The roof is both shelter and potential betrayal. Cozy, yes. Also flammable, medieval home design really does enjoy keeping things emotionally balanced. A drop falls. It lands near the hearth with a soft tick. Another follows. The woman glances up, then moves a small pot beneath the drip. Not a large gesture, not panic, just adjustment. Weather has entered the conversation, and now it receives a container. This is the domestic genius of old houses. The problem is rarely solved forever, only managed tonight. One reliable detail from the historical record is that ordinary rural houses across medieval Europe varied greatly by region, wealth, and available materials. Some used timber framing with wattle and daub, some used stone, some had thatched roofs, others wooden shingles, tiles, turf, or mixed coverings. The cottage you sit in is not a universal medieval home, because there was no single universal medieval anything, except perhaps sore feet and the belief that one more tax was excessive. But the basic truth remains: shelter depended on local materials, constant repair, and household labour. The wind slides over the roof. It finds the smoke hole or vent and pushes downward. A puff of smoke rolls back into the room. Everyone lowers their heads, blinking. Your eyes water at once. The child coughs softly, and the man adjusts the fire with a stick, opening the fuel so it burns cleaner. Smoke control is an art, and apparently tonight the storm is an art critic. You breathe through your mouth. Bad idea. Now you taste the smoke too. The dog sneezes under the bench. This is perhaps the most honest review anyone has given. Outside, a heavier gust strikes the wall. The shutter rattles in its wooden frame. Snow hisses through some tiny gap and dusts the inner sill with the white. The woman takes a scrap of cloth and pushes it into the crack. The movement is quick, practiced, and deeply relatable. Across the centuries, humanity remains united by the desire to stop cold air from sneaking in where it is not invited. A curious scrap of old belief belongs to nights like this. In many medieval communities, storms could be understood not only as weather, but as spiritual disturbance. Divine warning, saintly test, witchcraft, demonic mischief, or the work of dangerous airborne forces. Church teaching, folk memory, and practical weather knowledge overlapped in ways that could make a snowstorm feel crowded with meanings. A gust was a gust, yes, but also perhaps a message. Medieval weather rarely arrived alone. It brought theology, gossip, and at least one neighbour with a confident explanation. You listen as the household murmurs a brief prayer. It is not theatrical, it is woven into the work, a word to God, a saint, the Virgin. Perhaps the local patron whose feast day everyone remembers more reliably than birthdays. A cross is made, the fire is adjusted again, the dripping pot is shifted slightly, the roof creaks, life continues. Researchers still dispute how sharply medieval people separated practical building knowledge from supernatural protection. Some documents show charms, blessings, inscribed crosses, buried objects, or ritual words used to guard houses, livestock, fields, and thresholds. Yet these did not replace ordinary maintenance. People prayed against storms, and they also mended roofs. Belief and repair could sit side by side without embarrassment. In fact, that may be one of the most human arrangements ever invented. You notice marks near the doorway, scratches, perhaps crosses, perhaps old knife cuts, perhaps nothing more mystical than damage from years of use. It is tempting to make every mark into a secret sign, because modern people love a mystery almost as much as medieval people loved blaming bad weather on moral failure. Still, threshold marks did exist in many places as protective gestures, though dating them and interpreting them can be difficult. Some may have been devotional, some apotropaic, meaning meant to turn away harm, although that is a rather fancy word for please do not let horrible things come in. Some may simply be scratches. The door shakes again, the wooden bar holds. You look at it with new respect. It is a plain thing. But tonight it is the difference between shelter and a very poor evening. Snow has gathered against the outer side. You can feel the pressure in the slight inward groan of the boards. Medieval doors are often solid but not perfectly sealed. Hinges may be iron if the household can afford them. Wooden or leather arrangements in humbler settings. Latches and bars matter. So do habits close it quickly? Bar it firmly, check it before sleep. The man rises and goes to the door. He presses his shoulder against it, listens, then reaches to the lower gap where cold air enters. He stuffs straw and cloth near the base, not to make it airtight, only less rude. His fingers move stiffly. The woman hands him another scrap without looking. They do not need to discuss the task. Their bodies know the sequence. A small shower of soot falls from above. You glance up sharply. The roof beam has only shifted under wind and snow weight. Or possibly the cottage is expressing its opinion about guests. Either way, the household remains calm. This calm teaches you more than any lecture. Medieval survival depends on knowing which noises mean danger and which noises are merely the house speaking in its sleep. The smell inside grows denser. Wet wool, smoke, hot ash, damp thatch. Earth from the cellar still clinging to your clothes, the faint sourness of the jug by the hearth, and now the smell of melting snow dripping into a pot, clean at first, then touched by soot and straw. You hear the drip, drip, drip. It becomes part of the night's rhythm. The child has fallen asleep sitting up. The head tips forward, then jerks back. The woman notices and softens. She spreads a blanket near the warmer side of the room, away from the worst draught, and gestures for the child to lie down. The child resists with the weak dignity of the nearly unconscious, then folds into the bedding and disappears under wool. The dog, sensing opportunity, inches closer to the blanket. No one stops him. Outside, the storm thickens into a low roar along the valley. Snow must be sweeping over the vineyard stakes now, filling the spaces between the rows, smoothing the terraces into white shelves. The repaired tie from earlier holds in your imagination. You picture it there, stiff with ice, gripping the cane while the wind tugs and tugs. That small repair suddenly feels heroic in a quiet way. The cottage creaks again. This time you do not tense as much. You are learning the language. The sharp rattle of shutter means wind. The soft tick means drip. The deep groan means roof weight. The hiss near the sill means snow finding a crack. The pop of the fire means resin or trapped moisture. The sneeze under the bench means dog. The silence after a gust means everyone is listening, just in case. The man banks the fire more carefully, drawing ash around the coals so they will last. Too much flame wastes fuel and risks sparks. Too little, and morning becomes a miserable exercise in coaxing life from cold ash. He places a screen or stones where needed, checks that no straw lies too close, and sits back with the tired seriousness of someone who has negotiated with fire before and knows it never fully signs the agreement. The pot beneath the leak fills one drop at a time. The roof holds. For now, that is enough. You settle deeper against the wall, feeling its cold through the layers at your back and the hearth's glow against your face. Between the two, you exist in a narrow band of comfort. Smoky and imperfect, but real. The storm owns the valley, the road, the vineyard rows, and the dark slopes beyond the village. But inside this cottage, beneath the anxious thatch and the patient beams, people have made a pocket of endurance. And as snow presses its white weight across the roof, you listen to the cottage endure itself, creaking, dripping, tugging shelters, carrying everyone gently toward the long middle of the night. The cottage settles into the rhythm of the leak, the fire, and the storm. The pot beneath the dripping roof gives a tiny sound each time water falls into it. Tick, tick, tick. It is almost soothing now, as long as you do not think too hard about what that water touched on the way down. The smoke has thinned a little, or perhaps your eyes have surrendered. Either way, you can see the room more clearly in the glow. The jug from the cellar is brought closer to the hearth. The woman pours a little wine into a small pot, adds water, and perhaps a pinch of something saved for winter comfort. A herb, a shaving of old spice if this household is unusually fortunate. Maybe a little honey if the year has been kind. More likely, it is simply warmed and shared because warm sour wine is still warmer than cold sour wine. And in this century, that counts as luxury with a straight face. You watch the liquid darken in the pot. Its smell rises slowly. Sharp grape, smoke, clay, damp wood, and a faint sweetness, in oldness from the heat. It does not smell like the festive mulled wine of a modern Christmas market. The kind served in a cheerful mug by someone wearing a very clean apron. This is rougher, thinner, and more practical, but when it is poured into a cup and passed into your hands, the warmth of it feels magnificent. You sip carefully. The taste is tart, earthy, and slightly smoky. It touches your throat and spreads downward. You can feel it settle beside the pottage already resting in your stomach. The effect is not dramatic. No grand medieval glow, no bard suddenly appearing with a harp. Thank goodness, just a little loosening, a little more distance between you and the weather. Around the hearth, the household shares what remains of supper in smaller pieces, a scrap of cheese, hard and salty, a few onions softened near the coals, a heel of bread, perhaps a bit of dried fruit from the cellar jar, dark as old amber and treasured like a secret. Food at night is not only fuel, it is reassurance. It says, "We have enough for this hour." We have not yet reached the bottom of the sack. The storm is loud, but the bowl was filled. A dependable truth about medieval table life is that manners mattered at every level of society, though they changed according to rank and setting. Noble manuals might instruct diners not to gnaw bones indecently, wipe hands on tablecloths, or poke fingers into shared dishes with too much enthusiasm. In a small cottage, no one is reading elegant courtesy books aloud for fun, probably because everyone has better things to do. Yet habits of sharing, waiting, offering, and not taking the best portion first still shape the meal. Courtesy is not always polished. Sometimes it is simply leaving the warmer place to someone older, or giving a child the softer bread. You notice how the cup is passed. No one drinks too deeply, no one holds it too long. The vessel itself is part of the rhythm, hand to hand, sip to sip. The household creates a small circle. Your fingers brush rough knuckles as you pass it on. The child, half asleep under the blanket, opens one eye when the dried fruit appears. This is apparently worth returning briefly to consciousness. A small piece is placed in the child's hand, and it vanishes with astonishing speed. The dog sees this. The dog would like to open negotiations. No one responds. A peculiar detail from medieval eating customs comes softly into the firelight in some places. People believe certain foods affected the humours of the body. Warming, cooling, moistening, or drying a person according to medical theory inherited from ancient writers and adapted through medieval learning. Onions might be praised or warned against, wine could be strengthening, dangerous, medicinal, or morally suspicious depending on who was speaking and how much had already been consumed. Imagine trying to enjoy supper while someone explains that your cabbage has philosophical implications. History is beautiful, but it does enjoy making dinner complicated. The woman tears bread into a bowl and softens it with warm liquid for the child. The action is so ordinary that it almost disappears, yet it holds the whole world of domestic care. Bread must be cut, saved, softened, shared. A child must be fed before sleep. A fire must be kept low enough not to burn through the night, but strong enough to keep the room alive. The same hands that tied cloth into the shutter crack now test the food for heat, then tuck the blanket higher around small shoulders. You lean back and listen. The household speaks more freely now, though softly. The storm creates privacy by making travel impossible. A neighbour cannot casually arrive. A lord's messenger is unlikely to appear, unless he is unusually dedicated to ruining evenings. The road is hidden. The valley is folded shut. In this room, voices can loosen. You catch talk of the vines, of a cracked barrel hoop, of a neighbour's goat that keeps finding ways to become a community problem. Goats, across eras, are tiny philosophers of property law. They ask, what is a fence really? A question nobody wants answered at supper. Someone mentions the miller, perhaps with suspicion. Medieval millers are often treated in stories and complaints as people who take more than their fair share, whether fairly or not. Their reputation arrives at the hearth before they do. There is a laugh, small, tired, but real. The laugh changes the room. Not enough to make it merry, exactly, but enough to remind you that medieval people were not only suffering in historically useful ways. They joked, they complained, they noticed absurdity, they made faces at sour wine, they teased children, they grumbled about neighbours. They were not illustrations in a textbook, solemnly waiting for the Renaissance to happen. They were alive, and being alive includes laughing when the roof leaks into a pot with excellent timing. Specialists continue to argue about how far-written records of elite dining can help us understand ordinary meals in cottages like this. The recipes that survive often come from wealthier households, monasteries, courts, or medical texts, while the food of peasants and vineyard workers must be reconstructed from archaeology, accounts, rents, tools, bones, seeds, and practical comparison. The result is never perfect, but the broad pattern is clear enough grain. Legumes, vegetables, dairy when available, preserved foods, occasional meat, and local drink made up much of rural winter eating. You look at the remnants around the hearth. Nothing is abundant, but nothing is meaningless. The cheese carries the work of animals. Milking, rennet, salt, pressing, drying, storage. The bread carries ploughing, sowing, harvesting, threshing, grinding, baking, and the miller's suspicious little shadow. The wine carries the vineyard slope under snow. The onions carry the kitchen garden, the cellar, and the careful saving of bulbs. Every bite has a biography. Medieval supper is not a menu, it is a map of labour. The man takes the knife he used earlier among the vines and wipes it clean. It may be used again to cut bread, shave wood, trim cord, or help with a repair. Modern kitchens like separate tools. This household likes tools that justify their existence daily. The blade catches firelight along one edge before disappearing into a leather sheath. You finish another sip of warm wine. The child finally slides fully into sleep. The dog, recognizing a weakness in household defences, moves close enough to rest his chin on the blanket. The woman looks at him. He freezes. She sighs and lets him remain. This is not victory, he seems to say with his closed eyes. This is justice. The storm outside becomes a steady hush. The worst gusts pass over the cottage and roll down into the valley. Snow taps the wall like fingers, then falls away inside. The hearth glow lowers and reddens. The food scents fade into smoke and wool. Your body feels heavy now, the kind of heaviness that comes from warmth after cold, from eating after walking, from sitting still while wind spends itself elsewhere. Someone gathers the last crumbs into a palm and drops them into a small bowl, perhaps for an animal, perhaps for morning use, perhaps because waste is a sin with practical consequences. The bowl is set aside, the cup is turned upside down, the pot is covered, the knife is stored. Supper is not ended by announcement, it simply becomes the next task. You draw your knees closer, listening to the quiet scrape of wood, the soft clink of pottery, the breath of the sleeping child, the dog's tiny sigh of triumph. The meal has left warmth behind in the room, not just from food, but from the human pattern of sharing it. Outside, the vineyard is still dark, still buried, still waiting, but inside, bread and pottage, sour wine and small laughter, manners and crumbs, have made a fragile little shelter within the shelter. The fire sinks lower. The final taste of wine lingers on your tongue, and as the household begins to prepare for true night, you understand that this plain winter supper has been a lesson in belonging. Offered one careful sip and one saved crumb at a time, the last cup is turned over, and the hearth settles into a lower red glow. But the cottage does not feel alone. That is the strange thing. The snow has hidden the road, softened the village bells, and folded the vineyard rows into darkness. Yet the valley still seems full of invisible threads. Every cottage, byre, barn, shed, chapel, mill, and manor building lies somewhere out there, muffled under the same storm. You cannot see them, but you feel them as the household feels them, neighbours beyond the white veil, close enough to matter, far enough to worry about. A gust moves down the slope. The shutter trembles. The man pauses with a piece of cord in his hands, listening, not to the roof this time, to the distance. It is a particular kind of listening, the kind people develop when landscape is not background but a living system of signals. A dog barking below, a bell sounding late, a shout carried by wind, a branch falling, hooves where no hooves should be. Silence can have shape when you know what usually fills it. You listen too. At first there is only storm, snow against wall, wind over thatch, fire settling into ash, the child breathing in sleep. Then, faintly somewhere across the valley, Another dog answers the weather. One bark, then two, then a long pause. The dog under the bench lifts his head, considers a reply, and decides that administrative duties can wait until morning. The woman smiles slightly. That distant bark belongs to someone. Perhaps a neighbour with 2 cows and an argumentative son. Perhaps a widow who keeps hens near the lane. Perhaps a tenant family who helped at harvest and borrowed a basket that has not yet come back. Because baskets, like gossip, travel more easily than they return. In a small medieval valley, people know one another not in the soft modern sense of occasional friendliness, but through necessity. They know who has a spare ox, who brews badly, who quarrels loudly, who can mend a shoe, who owes labour, who is generous when grain runs short, who says they are generous, which is not the same thing at all. Rural medieval life was built on networks of dependence. Households borrowed tools, shared labour at harvest, helped with childbirth, watched animals, exchanged news, witnessed agreements, tended church together, and appeared in manor courts beside or against one another. The community could be kind, nosy, protective, suffocating, and absolutely impossible to ghost. If you did something foolish with a fence, a pig, or a promise, the valley would know before you finished explaining yourself. The hearth pops softly. You imagine the neighbours hidden in the snow. Down by the stream, the mill stands with its wheels stilled or half frozen, depending on the current. The miller's house may glow faintly behind shutters, and inside, perhaps someone is counting grain, which immediately makes everyone suspicious, because millers have that effect in medieval stories. Near the church, a cluster of homes leans around lanes packed with snow and manure. A priest might be closing a door against the wind, checking a candle, or wondering whether anyone will make it to Mass if the storm deepens. Farther up the opposite hill, another vineyard cottage may be doing exactly what yours is doing, banking a fire, drying cloaks, muttering about leaks, and pretending the wine is better than it is. A bell sounds very faint. It may be real, or your mind may be making one from memory. The snow alters sound in peculiar ways. It absorbs sharpness, rounds edges, and makes distance uncertain. In the Middle Ages, bells were not decorative atmosphere. They marked prayer hours, warned of fire, called people to worship, announced death, summoned labour, and sometimes gave voice to the community itself. A bell could reach where written notices could not. It was public sound in a world where most news travelled by mouth and foot. The woman crosses herself at the faint note. The man does not look up, but his hands pause. That is how sound enters a room. No grand drama, just a tiny interruption in the body. A small oddity from medieval bell culture drifts naturally into the scene. A snowy quiet, bells were sometimes given names, blessed in ceremonies, and treated almost as personalities with protective power. People might believe their ringing could drive away storms, demons, or harmful forces in the air. From a modern view, a bell is metal-shaped for sound from this valley's view. It may also be a guardian with a voice. Honestly, if you had to face winter in a leaky cottage, you might also appreciate a loud holy object on your side. The household speaks of a neighbour across the lower field. You catch enough to understand that someone is ill, or perhaps merely old in a season that is hard on old bones. If the snow blocks the track, help will not come quickly, yet help exists, waiting in the habits of the village. Someone may bring broth, someone may split wood, someone may sit through the night. Someone may also repeat every detail afterward with unnecessary improvements, because charity and gossip have always shared a bench. You picture a woman pushing through the snow before dawn with a covered bowl under her cloak. You picture a boy sent to fetch the priest. You picture 2 men digging out a drift near a gate, grumbling together, because grumbling is the social glue of hard labour. None of it is sentimental. Mutual aid in a village is not pure sweetness, it is obligation, memory, pressure, fear of shame, affection, religion, and the practical understanding that next winter, you may be the one who needs the bowl. Researchers approach this neighbourly world carefully because the records are uneven. Manor court rolls show disputes over animals, boundaries, debts, insults, broken agreements, and stolen wood, which can make medieval villages look like non-stop complaint factories. But those records preserve conflict precisely because conflict required recording. The quiet cooperation of daily life often left fewer traces, so when people today ask whether medieval villagers were more communal or more quarrelsome, the honest answer is yes, and probably before breakfast. The man tells a short story about harvest, his voice is low, amused. You do not catch every word, but the shape is clear. Someone dropped a basket. Someone blamed a slope. Someone else blamed the wine that had not yet officially become wine. The woman corrects one detail. The man accepts the correction with the noble patience of a person who knows he is outmatched by witnesses. The story ends with another small laugh. Harvest must have crowded this cottage with voices. You imagine it now, the same room in autumn, the door open, grape baskets stacked outside, hand-stained purple, wasps drifting in like tiny winged tax collectors, workers bending, cutting, carrying, calling, across rows, children told to stay out of the way and immediately failing, neighbours arriving not because the day is convenient, but because ripeness does not negotiate in wine country. Harvest binds people into urgent labour. The snowstorm tonight is the opposite of that noise, yet the memory of it remains in the walls. A neighbour may owe work here, or this household may owe work elsewhere. Medieval labour obligations could be formal, customary, seasonal, and tangled. One family's vineyard task might depend on another family's ox, cart, press, or cellar space. Press especially could become a shared or controlled resource, valuable enough to create fees and rights. The grape does not care about legal arrangements. Of course, it simply ripens and waits for everyone else to panic efficiently. The dog outside barks again. This time the cottage dog answers with one low sound, more opinion than alarm. Everyone listens. Nothing follows, no shout, no footstep, no knock at the door, only wind and snow. The dog lowers his head, satisfied that he has personally preserved the household. You feel the distance to the village and the closeness of it at once. Out there, each roof holds its own fire, its own stores, its own aches, its own sleeping children, its own wet cloaks, its own animals shifting in straw. People are separated by fields and lanes, but tied by bells, paths, obligations, kinship, marriage, memory, shared tools, shared saints, shared grudges, and shared weather. The storm makes every house an island, yet the valley remains a woven thing beneath the snow. The woman rises to check the door again, not because anyone is expected, but because someone might come, a traveller lost on the road, a neighbour needing fire, a child sent with a message. The possibility itself must be honoured. She lifts the cloth near the lower crack, presses it tighter, and listens with her ear near the boards for a moment. All you can hear is the storm breathing on the other side. No knock comes. She returns to the hearth. The fire is lower now, and the red coals shine like hidden fruit. You think of the vineyard outside, buried under white, and the village below, buried under quiet. Somewhere a bell rope hangs still, somewhere a mill wheel waits in ice, somewhere a neighbour lies awake, listening just as you listen. The cottage feels smaller, but not lonelier. It belongs to the valley, and tonight you do too, tucked inside its web of sound and silence, held by the knowledge that beyond the storm, other hearths are glowing in the dark. The talk of neighbours fades, not because anyone announces an ending, but because tiredness moves through the cottage like a second snowfall. Voices become softer, movements become slower. The storm keeps working at the walls, but inside, the household begins the careful transformation from evening to sleep. It is not as simple as walking into a bedroom and vanishing beneath a duvet. Medieval bedtime is a small engineering project involving cloth, straw, bodies, fire, habit, and the humble acceptance that warmth must be negotiated before it is enjoyed. The woman lifts the bedding from the wall. A straw mattress is dragged closer to the safer warmth of the hearth, though not too close, because nobody wants to discover in the night that comfort has become a small indoor bonfire. The mattress is not a thick modern cushion. It is a sack stuffed with straw, chaff, reeds, or other available plant material. Depending on region and means, it rustles as it moves, dry in some places, suspiciously lumpy in others. You look at it with hope, then with realism. Tonight, your spine will be learning history directly. A blanket follows, then another. Wool, rough but warm. Linen, cooler and smoother where the household owns it. Cloaks, folded garments, perhaps a sheepskin if fortune and livestock have been cooperative. Bedding in a cottage is rarely separate from clothing. Storage and daily life. The same cloak that keeps snow from your shoulders may become part of your night covering. The same bench used for sitting may become someone's sleeping place. The line between furniture and survival equipment is beautifully vague. You help spread the straw mattress. It releases a dry, dusty smell, mixed with old smoke and the faint animal scent of wool. The child has already claimed one warm corner without negotiation. An ancient legal principle known as "I am asleep, therefore this is mine." The dog presses nearer, pretending to be accidental. The adults arrange bedding around the room according to draft. Warmth, age, and habit. No one asks your preference, which is merciful, because your preference is an inn with clean sheets and a door that does not breathe snow. Ordinary people in medieval Europe often slept in garments rather than changing into special nightclothes. Dedicated sleepwear was not unknown in every setting, especially among wealthier people later on. But for rural households, practical layers mattered more. A linen shift or smock might sit next to the skin. A wool tunic could go over it. Hose, wraps, caps, hoods, cloaks, and blankets all help conserve heat in winter. The body itself was a valuable hearth. You kept it covered. You loosen your belt. This one small act brings immediate relief. Medieval clothing is held, shaped, and organized by ties, belts, pins, laces, and layers. You do not simply zip down into softness. You unfasten, tug, adjust, unwrap, and consider where every item goes so it does not vanish into straw, smoke, or dog territory. Your outer cloak is still drying near the fire. Your shoes or boots must be placed where they will not freeze solid, but not so close that sparks eat them. Your hose are damp at the hem. Your tunic smells like the cellar, the vineyard, and you, which is a powerful blend best experienced by candlelight and very forgiving company. The woman hands you a piece of cloth to wipe your feet. Not a luxurious washing, just enough. In better supplied households, foot washing before bed could be an act of hospitality, humility, or basic hygiene, and in religious settings it carried deep symbolism. Here, tonight, it is mostly about not dragging half the vineyard into the bedding. You do your best, the water is cold, the cloth rough, and the floor colder than both. Your toes curl. You make a face. The child, still apparently asleep, somehow notices and smiles. A funny little custom clings to the world of medieval warmth. People sometimes wore nightcaps or head coverings to bed, not for comedy, though later art has made them look delightfully unserious, but because a covered head helps conserve heat. The idea of sleeping bareheaded in a room where frost might flirt with the walls is very modern, very brave, and perhaps very foolish. A cap at night is not a fashion statement. It is a tiny roof for your skull. The man pulls his hood lower while sitting near the hearth. He checks the door bar one more time. The shutter cloth remains wedged in place. The drip pot is half full. The fire has been banked so the coals will live under ash through the dark hours. The room is dimmer now, lit less by flame than by the slow red pulse of embers. Shadows grow larger. The hanging tools become dark shapes. The beams above disappear into smoke and night. Bedding, bodies, and stored goods blend into one low landscape of survival. You lie down carefully. The straw answers with a loud crackle that seems far too dramatic for such a gentle movement. Everyone hears it. Nobody comments. You shift again, trying to make a hollow for your hip. The mattress resists, then gives in a little. A lump presses into your side, you move it. Another lump introduces itself. Medieval bedding has a social nature. It wants to meet you. Wool comes over you. At first it scratches your neck. Then the warmth begins, slowly, patiently. Wool has the blessed habit of keeping warmth even when damp, which is one reason it mattered so much in cold climates. Linen ere the skin feels cooler, but cleaner and more comfortable when dry. Fur or skins, when available, add another layer of insulation. In a cottage like this, warmth comes not from one perfect blanket, but from accumulation, cloth over cloth, body near body, fire under ash, door sealed badly but earnestly. Researchers do not fully agree on how often bedding was refreshed among poorer households, partly because the evidence comes from scattered household accounts, archaeology, moral writing, medical advice, and later comparisons. Some people may have changed straw regularly when supplies allowed. Others likely endured bedding far longer than any modern hotel reviewer would permit. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs were familiar companions in many settings. This is the point where your sleepy medieval fantasy politely invites you not to look too closely at the mattress. You decide not to look, a wise choice. The woman shakes out a linen cloth and lays it near the child's face. Perhaps this is cleaner than the rest. Perhaps it simply feels softer. The gesture is small, tender, and efficient. Around the room, each person becomes a shape under wool. The man lies nearer the door, or nearer the place from which he can rise quickly if needed. The woman remains closest to the child. You are placed where a guest can share warmth without being too inconvenient, a delicate balance in any century. The dog, after a long campaign of silent diplomacy, settles against your lower legs. He is warm. You forgive him everything. Your feet, which have been cold and slightly miserable, begin to thaw around the small furnace of dog. This is how animals enter domestic comfort, not as cute accessories, but as heat, alarm, labour, companionship, and occasional theft. A cat might guard stores from mice, a dog might watch the threshold, a hen might sleep inside to protect her from weather or predators. Humans and animals share space because both are useful, and because winter is less cruel when something warm breathes nearby. The storm continues. Snow taps the shutter. Wind presses the roof. The leak ticks into the pot, but under the wool. The sounds begin to change. They are no longer warnings. They become part of the room's lullaby. You hear the slow breath of the child, the deeper breath of the man, the woman shifting once, then stilling, the dog sighing against your ankles as if he has personally arranged civilization. You pull the blanket closer to your chin. The wool smells of smoke, lanolin, damp, and many nights before this one. It is not fresh in the modern sense, but it carries the household's warmth. You feel your own body heat gather beneath it, caught between linen and wool, straw and wall, dog and fire. The cottage no longer seems quite so harsh. It is still smoky, crowded, draughty, and deeply committed to making every object scratch at least a little. But it is also working. The layers are working. The fire is working. The roof, despite its complaints, is working. The people around you are working even in sleep, lending warmth to the shared dark. Outside, the vineyard rows vanish under deeper snow. Inside, wool and linen draw the night close, fold it gently, and make a narrow place for rest. The wool gathers around your shoulders, and the cottage sinks another layer into night. You are not asleep yet. Not quite. Your body has become warm enough to notice every small discomfort with impressive clarity. A straw point touches your ribs. A fold of cloth presses under your elbow. The dog, generous furnace that he is, has placed one paw on your ankle as if claiming property rights. You could move, but that would disturb the delicate arrangement of warmth, and so you remain still, practicing the ancient art of accepting a minor inconvenience because the alternative is worse. The room is dark now, except for the embers. They glow beneath their ash like buried sunset. Every so often, a coal shifts and shows a line of red, then dims again. No candle burns. Candles cost money, and sleep does not need flattering light. Rushlights might be used in modest households, made by dipping dried rushes in fat, but even those must be spent carefully. Darkness is not an accident here. It is an economy. You listen. At first, the night seems full of one sound, the storm. But as your ears adjust, the storm separates into many voices. Snow brushes the shutter in soft strokes. Wind pushes under the eaves and makes the thatch whisper. The roof beam gives a slow wooden creak, then another, spaced so far apart that each one feels considered. The drip pot near the hearth continues its patient counting. Tick, pause, tick, pause, a quiet little clock made of weather and poor roofing. Somewhere in the wall, something scratches. You open your eyes. The scratching stops. Of course it stops. Mice have an extraordinary sense of theatre. You stare into the dark corner where sacks and baskets make hunched shapes. Nothing moves. You close your eyes again. The scratching returns. Lighter this time. Almost polite. It is probably a mouse. It might be two mice. It might be the entire mouse parliament discussing grain policy. In a cottage where food is stored close to sleeping bodies, small creatures become part of the night's population. People in the medieval countryside lived much closer to animals, insects, and pests than most modern sleepers do. Chickens, pigs, goats, sheep, cattle, dogs, cats, and the uninvited kingdom of mice, fleas, lice, and bedbugs all shape domestic life in different ways. Even when larger livestock stayed in a byre or attached space, their sounds and smells were nearby. The home was not sealed from nature. It negotiated with nature, and nature read the contract very creatively. The hen in the basket rustles. A soft cluck rises from the darkness, uncertain and offended. Perhaps she has dreamed of a fox. Perhaps the dog has sighed in her direction. Perhaps, like everyone else, she finds the roof concerning. The child turns under the blanket and murmurs something that does not become a word. The woman responds without waking fully, a quiet sound from the throat, and the child stills. Care continues even inside sleep. You breathe slowly. Smoke lies lightly in the room. It stings less now, though it has not vanished. It clings to the beams, the wool, your hair, the straw, the dog. Smoke is unpleasant, but it also does useful work. It helps dry the roof from within. It discourages some insects, though certainly not enough to make your bedding heroic. It preserves certain foods hung in its path. It marks every surface with the memory of fire. A house like this is never just built once. It is seasoned by years of smoke. A curious belief sometimes found in medieval and later folk practice is that house sounds could carry meanings beyond wood and weather. A sudden crack might be read as an omen. An animal crying at night could be troubling. A dream voice, a knock with no visitor, a strange sound from the roof, all might be folded into the household understanding of luck, death, saints, threats, or warning. To modern ears, the cottage creaks because wood expands, contracts, and bears weight. To a tired medieval listener in a storm, it might be wise to allow at least one saint to be involved, just in case. The wind rises, the shutter bangs once, everyone wakes slightly, not fully, just enough. The man's breathing changes, the woman shifts, the dog lifts his head and releases a low grumble that seems meant to reassure the room he is available for important matters. The shutter does not bang again. The household settles back, one body at a time. You understand now that sleep here is not a single clean fall into silence. It is layered. porous, alert at the edges. People wake to check the fire, listen for animals, tend children, relieve themselves, pray, adjust coverings, or respond to weather. The night is shared with tasks, fears, and sounds. Silence would not necessarily feel safer. Silence might be the strange thing. Modern researchers continue to question how medieval sleep patterns varied by season, class, work, and region. Some evidence suggests that people often experience segmented sleep, with a period of waking between a first and second sleep, especially in longer winter nights. Yet it would be too simple to imagine everyone everywhere followed the same pattern. A shepherd, a mother with an infant, a monk rising for offices, a vineyard worker after harvest, and a sick old man in a storm would all meet the night differently. Sleep is biological, yes, but it is also social. The cottage creaks again. This time the sound is soft, almost companionable. You let it pass through you. Your mind drifts to the valley beyond the wall. Snow has covered the path completely now. The vineyard stakes stand in rows like marks on a hidden page. The church bell is silent. The mill wheel is frozen or still. Other households are listening to their own roofs, their own mice, their own animals, their own sleepers turning under wool. The whole valley is awake in fragments. Dozing and listening and dozing. A faint smell rises from the embers. Vine wood, burnt low. It carries a sweetness beneath the ash, a reminder of the slope outside and the work done before the storm. You remember holding the light while the man retied the cane. You remember the cellar barrels below your feet, the sour wine, the onions, the hidden stores. You remember the warm cup passed from hand to hand. These memories begin to blur into the sounds around you. The scratching in the wall becomes pruning shears. The drip becomes wine poured into a jug. The wind becomes distant harvest voices moving through rows of leaves. Then the dog twitches. His paw presses harder into your ankle. He is dreaming, perhaps of crumbs, perhaps of wolves, perhaps of an enormous unattended cheese. His small movements send warmth through the blanket, and you feel affection for this damp, smoky, crumb-obsessed creature with his great faith in human flaws. He belongs to the cottage as much as the hearth does, as much as the door bar, the drip pot, the straw mattress, the cellar plank. Every part of the household has a sound. It is a sigh. Outside, something shifts in the snow. A soft slide from the roof. Perhaps snow dropping from thatch to ground. The sound is heavy but not dangerous. The man wakes enough to hear it, waits, then exhales. The roof has shed some weight. Good. The cottage has adjusted itself again. Your eyelids grow heavier. The darkness no longer feels empty. It is textured with ordinary life. Breath, straw, timber, ember, mouse, hen, dog, wind, roof, drip, and distant snow. Not peaceful in the modern spa sense. No scented candle promising lavender serenity. No perfect mattress with unnecessary pillows. But peaceful in the older sense. Everyone is inside. The fire lives, the door holds, the storm remains outside. And the sounds of the night have names. You turn your face slightly into the wool. It scratches your cheek, then warms. The last thing you hear before sleep begins to take you is the small hidden movement beneath the floor. Or perhaps only your imagination returning to the cellar. Barrels resting in the dark. Jars waiting. Stores keeping faith with the household. Above them, bodies under blankets. Above those, beams and thatch. Above that, snow falling over the valley. Layer upon layer, the cottage shelters its sleepers, and you drift at last into the noise of medieval darkness, where nothing is silent, yet everything, somehow, is quiet enough. Sleep does not take you cleanly. It gathers you in pieces, drawing one thought away, then returning another, then letting the cottage sounds rearrange themselves into shapes behind your eyes. The drip in the pot becomes a footstep. The wind becomes a voice from the vineyard rows. The dog's breathing becomes a bellows beside a forge, slow and warm. You float just beneath waking, wrapped in wool, smoke, and the faint sour breath of the cellar below. In this half-lit place inside the mind, the cottage grows larger. The roof rises into darkness like a church nave. The beams stretch away, black and shining with soot. The embers glow like tiny windows across a far hillside. Outside, the snow continues falling, but now each flake seems deliberate, as if some patient hand is covering the valley for safekeeping. You are not frightened, not exactly. Medieval night has many edges, but dream softens them. It turns hard things symbolic, then refuses to explain itself, which is very on brand for dreams. You see the vineyard under moonlight, though no moon can be seen through the storm. The rows run white and silver down the slope. Each vine has become a small crooked figure, bent beneath winter, waiting with its arms out. One vine lifts its head, naturally, because dreams have no respect for agriculture. It seems to look toward the cottage, then toward the village, then back at you, as if reminding you that everything planted must sleep before it wakes. Medieval people took dreams seriously in ways that could be cautious, hopeful, suspicious, or learned. Church writers often warned that dreams might come from ordinary bodily causes, divine messages, demonic trickery, or the restless mind. Medical thinkers could connect dreams to digestion, temperature, and the balance of humours. Ordinary people, meanwhile, might simply wake and wonder whether a dream meant rain, illness, fortune, warning, or nothing more than too much onion before bed. A very fair question, honestly, because the pottage did have confidence. The dream changes. You are standing near the cellar opening again. The plank is lifted, though no hand has touched it. Cold air rises, carrying the smell of earth and wine. Below, the barrels are no longer still. They murmur to one another in low wooden voices. One complains about being tapped too often. Another thinks the cellar is too damp. A third is convinced it is becoming vinegar, and would like everyone to know this is not its fault. You listen gravely, because dream etiquette requires respect toward talking barrels. A small shape moves beside them. A mouse sits upright on a sack of beans, wearing what might be a tiny hood. This seems important, but only because dreams are experts at giving nonsense the emotional weight of law. The mouse points toward the door with one paw. You understand, without words, that something outside wants entry. Then the church bell rings, not from the village, from inside the cottage. The sound swells through the beams, down into the cellar, into the straw beneath your back, into your bones in waking life. Bells marked prayer. Time, alarm, death, and community. In dream life, the bell seems to mark a crossing. Night to deeper night. Waking to first sleep, snowfall to silence. It rings once, twice, then fades into the dog's low growl. Your eyes open for a moment. The dream and the room overlap. The embers are real, the wool is real, the dog is real, and looking toward the door. The man has raised his head from his bedding. The woman is still, listening. Wind presses against the cottage, then pulls away. Nothing knocks, no voice calls. Perhaps a branch slid from the roof, perhaps a fox passed near the hens. Perhaps the dog dreamed at the same time you did, and between the two of you, the cottage became unnecessarily dramatic. The man waits a few breaths, then lies down again. The dog remains alert for another moment. Proud of this essential service, then he lowers his head back onto your foot. You close your eyes. A line of protection runs through the room in small, visible gestures. The door bar, the banked fire, the cross made earlier. The whispered prayer, the bedding arranged near warmth. The animals brought close, the stored food hidden below. Protection in this world is not one thing, it is physical, social, spiritual, practical, habitual. You repair the shutter and invoke a saint. You salt the meat and bless the threshold. You count the beans and hope the Virgin is listening. It is easy to smile at this from a warm modern room, but less easy when the wind is leaning on the door and the roof is negotiating with gravity. Little household charms and protective habits could be surprisingly varied. People might place blessed objects near beds, mark doors, use herbs, recite prayers, keep relics or pilgrim badges, or trust certain saints for certain dangers. St. Vincent, for example, became associated with wine growers in parts of Europe, while other local saints guarded fields, weather, childbirth, animals, or travellers. The heavenly world was not abstract and distant. It was organised almost like a vast neighbourhood of specialists, each with a reputation, a story, and, hopefully, some influence. You drift again. This time you dream of the village below. The snow has covered every roof, but each house glows from within, not with firelight exactly, but with breath. You can see the threads between them, thin as spun flax, running from door to door, hearth to hearth, kin to kin. One thread runs to the mill, one to the church, one to the manor, several to cottages whose names you do not know but somehow remember. The threads tremble when the bell sounds. They tighten when the wind rises. They loosen when people sleep. Some learned writers in the Middle Ages worried about dream interpretation, because it could slide too easily into superstition, while others preserved complex traditions of meaningful dreams from the Bible, classical texts, and popular lore. The difficult question, then as now, was not whether dreams felt meaningful. They almost always do. The question was, who had the authority to say what they meant? Priest, physician, elder, dream book, neighbour, or the dreamer, lying awake under a scratchy blanket at 3 a.m. with a dog on their ankle. Not the easiest committee. In your dream, the snow outside becomes flour. The whole valley is a kneading trough. The hills are dough rising under cloth. The vines are dark seeds pressed into it. A pair of enormous hands shapes the landscape gently, not to destroy it, but to let it rest. You feel yourself becoming smaller, tucked like a warm crumb inside the cottage loaf. This should be absurd. It is absurd. Yet it feels soothing. Perhaps the mind, when cold and tired, will accept comfort in any available metaphor. The child murmurs nearby. You wake again, briefly. The woman reaches out from her bedding and touches the child's shoulder. No words, just touch. The child quiets. The storm continues. The drip pot is nearly full now, and each drop has a deeper sound. The room smells of wool, smoke, sleep, and cooling wine. The embers have sunk lower, but they remain alive beneath ash, red as little saints' lamps. You wonder what dreams the household might remember in the morning. The man may dream of broken stakes, the woman may dream of stores running low, or bread rising, or a neighbour calling from the road. The child may dream of the dog doing something heroic and unlikely. The dog, of course, dreams of dried fruit finally being recognised as his rightful inheritance. You smile without opening your eyes. The cottage has carried you into the part of night where the world feels both fragile and held. Medieval darkness is not empty space. It is crowded with saints, signs, animals, weather, memory, digestion, fear, and the stubborn human talent for making meaning from every sound. A creak may be timber. It may also remind you to pray. A dream may be cabbage and smoke. It may also guide your morning mood. The truth may be practical and mysterious at once. Outside, the snowstorm moves across the valley, covering road, terrace, field, and roof in one continuous hush. Inside, you breathe with the sleepers. The bell in your dream fades. The talking barrels go silent. The mouse in the hood retreats to whatever kingdom mice claim beneath human floors. The white vineyard waits behind your closed eyes, rooted in frozen earth, guarded by prayers, ropes, ash, and ordinary tired hands. You sink deeper now, past the first thin dreams, past the questions they leave behind, into a softer darkness where the cottage sounds become distant and kind. And somewhere between saint and snowflake, between omen and onion, you let the night hold you without needing to understand it. You wake without knowing why. There is no crash, no voice, no sudden terror waiting at the edge of the room. Only darkness, thicker than before. And the slow recognition that sleep has loosened its hold on you for a while. Your eyes open to the low red shine beneath the ash. The fire has become a hidden thing, not flame now, but memory with heat inside it. The cottage is almost still, almost. The storm continues outside, though it seems farther away, as if the valley has been wrapped in so much snow that even the wind must speak through cloth. The shutter no longer rattles sharply. It gives only an occasional wooden tap. The drip pot is full or nearly full, and the drops fall with a deeper, rounder sound. Somewhere under the floor, the cellar keeps its cold silence. Somewhere in the wall, a mouse moves with the confidence of a tiny landlord. You lie still and listen. This is the hour between sleeps, the quiet island in the middle of the medieval night. At least, that is what it feels like. Your first sleep has ended, the second has not yet begun. Your body is warm enough beneath wool, but your face is cool where the air touches it. The dog remains against your legs, heavier now, as if sleep has turned him into a sack of warm grain. The child breathes softly nearby. The woman is turned toward the hearth, one hand visible outside the blanket. The man's shape lies near the door, close to the bar, a sleeping guard who might rise quickly if the night asks too much. In long winter darkness, people often experience the night as a stretched and usable span, rather than one unbroken block. Some written evidence from later medieval and early modern Europe refers to a first sleep and second sleep, with waking between them for prayer, conversation, tending fires, relieving oneself, intimacy, checking animals, or simply thinking. That does not mean every person followed an identical pattern every night. Still, here in the snowbound cottage, the idea feels completely sensible when darkness lasts so long. Even sleep takes a pause. You shift carefully. The straw whispers beneath you. The dog opens one eye, decides you are not producing food, and returns to his dreams. Your shoulder aches slightly from the mattress. Your hip has found a new lump, or perhaps the old lump has invited relatives. You breathe in and let the discomfort become part of the room. Nothing here is designed to erase the body is always present. Cold toes, smoky throat, full stomach, stiff neck, warm back, sleepy eyes. The man stirs. He does not wake in a dramatic way, he simply becomes awake, as if he has been listening from underneath sleep. He lifts himself on one elbow and turns toward the hearth. For a few moments he watches the embers, then he reaches for the fire stick and gently opens the ash, exposing a deeper red. The glow brightens. A thin thread of smoke rises. He places a small bit of fuel near the coals. Not enough to create a blaze, only enough to keep life ready for morning. The care of night fire is its own skill. Too much fuel wastes precious wood and may risk sparks. Too little leaves the household struggling at dawn with cold ash and numb fingers. In many cottages, fire is not just warmth but continuity, the living centre of the house carried from evening into morning. Letting it die completely is not disaster if you can borrow flame from a neighbour or strike a new one, but in a storm, with snow sealing the path, keeping the ember alive is the calmer choice, very reasonable. Nobody wants to start the day begging a frozen tinderbox for mercy. A faint whisper comes from the woman, perhaps a prayer. The man answers quietly, or perhaps only breathes. The words are too soft for you to catch, but their rhythm feels familiar, a line remembered from church. A saint invoked, a blessing over sleep, a plea for the roof, the child, the stores, the animals, the vines. Night prayer does not need performance. It can be smaller than a sigh. In a world where danger enters through weather, illness, hunger, accident, and authority, a few whispered words become a kind of shelter made from sound. There were formal prayers for the hours, especially in monasteries and clerical life, where the night could be divided by offices such as matins. Ordinary lay people did not live like monks, unless they were very unusual and probably exhausted. But the rhythms of church time still shaped imagination. Bells, feast days, saints' names, liturgical seasons, and the habit of crossing oneself entered domestic life. Here, half awake in the cottage, devotion sits beside ash, wool, and damp socks without any awkwardness. Your mind drifts, but not fully into dream. You think of the village across the valley. In one house, someone may be awake nursing a baby. In another, an old man may be sitting up to ease his breathing. A widow may be checking whether the hens are quiet. A servant in the manor kitchen may be stirring embers before others rise. A priest may wake briefly and listen for the storm against the church roof. The valley is sleeping, yes, but in fragments. Each dark room holds its own small watch. A less expected detail from medieval nightlife is that the hours after first sleep were sometimes considered a good time for reflection, prayer, or even quiet conversation, because the mind could feel unusually clear. Later writers occasionally noted this wakeful interval as ordinary. It is strange from the modern world that treats waking at night as a malfunction. Here, it can be part of the patterns, not insomnia, exactly. More like the night opening one eye and inviting you to sit with it. The man rises quietly. He moves towards the door, stepping over bedding with impressive familiarity. You hold your breath as he passes near you, not wanting to be the guest who turns bedtime into a wrestling match with straw. He pauses at the bar and touches it. Still firm, he listens with his ear close to the wood, beyond the door. The storm mutters and snow presses softly against the lower boards. Then comes a sound outside, a faint crunch. The man stills. You stop breathing for a moment. Ding. The dog hears it too. His head lifts. His ears sharpen into the dark. Another crunch follows. Then a slide. Then nothing. Your mind offers several possibilities. None especially helpful. Fox. Branch. Snow falling from the roof, neighbour, thief, wolf, ghost, goat with poor boundaries. Medieval night is generous with explanations and stingy with proof. The man waits. The dog gives one low growl. No knock comes, no animal cries, no footstep repeats. After a long pause, the man relaxes slightly and nudges the dog with one bare foot. The dog lowers his head but keeps his eyes open, because professionalism must be maintained. Questions about medieval fear at night are difficult because records often preserve dramatic events, moral warnings, legal complaints, and religious interpretations more clearly than ordinary calm. Yet it is reasonable to imagine that watchfulness was a normal part of rural sleep. Doors were checked, fires were minded, animals were heard, weather was judged. The household did not assume the night was hostile, but neither did it treat the dark as empty. You feel your heart slow. The sound outside was probably snow dropping from the roof edge. That is the sensible answer. It is also the answer you choose, because you are warm and do not wish to join a heroic investigation in your damp hose. Courage is admirable. Staying under wool is wiser. The man returns to his place. The woman murmurs again, perhaps asking what it was. He answers in a few quiet words, snow, maybe. Or nothing. Nothing is a very useful word at night. It closes many doors. You remain awake a little longer. The room has changed now that you have seen it in this middle hour. The cottage is not asleep like a stone. It is resting like a creature that can still hear. Its beams hold. Its roof bears snow. Its walls block most of the wind. Its stores wait below. Its people lie close enough to wake one another. Each part watches a little. Each part trusts the others. The embers brighten briefly where the man stirred them, then settle again. The small fuel catches, glows, and darkens. A thin warmth moves across the room. Not much, but enough. The dog sighs. The child turns over. The drip pot gives one final hollow note, then seems to pause, as if even the leak has grown sleepy. Your thoughts loosen. You remember the doorway into winter, the sour wine, the cellar, the vines under snow, the bells across the valley, the layers of wool and linen. All of it gathers around you like another blanket. This pause between sleeps no longer feels like interruption. It feels like belonging to the night's hidden schedule. Outside, the snow continues its soft labour. Inside, the cottage keeps vigil by ember, breath and habit. And as your eyes close again, you let the second sleep approach slowly, not as a fall, but as a door opening inward, warm enough, dark enough, and watched over by all the small faithful things that have not yet given up on morning. Morning does not arrive as a bright announcement. It seeps into the cottage slowly, grey and cold, pressing at the shutter cracks until the darkness thins. You wake from the second sleep with the heavy softness of someone who has not so much rested as survived horizontally. The wool is warm around you, the straw is determined beneath you, and the dog is still at your feet, making the bold argument that he has been essential to your continued existence. For once, he may be right. The fire is quiet, but alive, beneath the ash. A dull red glow remains where the man stirred it in the night. The room smells different now, less of supper, more of bodies, damp wool, old smoke, cooling ashes, and the stale closeness of many sleepers sharing one room until dawn. Not pleasant, exactly, but not shocking anymore. Your nose has become medieval by necessity, which is not the sentence anyone hopes to hear about themselves. The child wakes first, or perhaps simply becomes loud first, a rustle, a sigh, a complaint about cold that needs no translation. The woman rises soon after, pulling a blanket around her shoulders before she stands. She moves like someone whose body knows the morning sequence before the mind has fully agreed to participate. Fire, door, water, animals, food, weather, stores, work. The man pushes himself up and sits for a moment, head bowed, listening. The storm has quieted. That does not mean it is gone. Snow still falls, but lightly now, a soft vertical drift instead of last night's sideways wandering. The wind has spent its anger somewhere down the valley. The cottage feels buried in silence. Even the usual outside sounds are muffled, as if the whole world has been tucked under wool. The first task is fire. The man kneels at the hearth and opens the ash with a stick. A red eye appears. Then another. He bends low and breathes carefully, not too hard. A thread of smoke rises. The woman hands him dry tinder saved from damp, perhaps straw, shavings, tow, or scraps of bark, kept in a sheltered place. The ember catches slowly. It glows, darkens, glows again. Then a tiny flame lifts itself, fragile as a newborn thought. Everyone waits. The flame strengthens. You had not realized how much hope can fit into one little tongue of fire. Without it, morning would be labor wrapped in misery. With it, the cottage can become a living room again. In the oldest sense, a room that helps the living continue. Medieval households often protected embers overnight for exactly this reason. A reliable morning fire saved time, effort, and discomfort, especially in wet weather, when starting flame from nothing could be deeply unpleasant. Flint and steel existed, of course, but anyone who has ever struggled with damp tinder understands why a banked ember is practically a miracle-wearing ash. A small flame becomes several, twigs go on, then vine cuttings. The smoke thickens, finds its upward path with sleepy confusion, and everyone blinks back into the day. Your eyes water. A familiar welcome from the cottage. Good morning, here is smoke. The woman lifts the drip pot from beneath the leak. It is nearly full, darkened slightly by soot and bits from the roof. She studies it, then sets it aside for a use that does not require optimism. Washing. Perhaps not drinking. Medieval people were practical, not foolish in exactly the way cartoons suggest. Water quality mattered, and households used wells, springs, streams, stored water, melted snow, and rainwater according to access and judgment. They may not have understood microbes, but they certainly understood bad taste, visible filth, and the consequences of a troublesome stomach. You sit up, every joint has an opinion. The straw mattress crackles beneath you as though announcing your age to the room. Your back aches. Your hip has composed a complaint poem. Your hair smells like smoke and wool. Still, you're warm enough to move, and that feels like wealth. You pull on your boots. They are stiff from drying badly, the leather cool and reluctant. Sliding your foot into one is like apologizing to a damp animal. The door must be open. This becomes a small event. The man lifts the bar. Snow has drifted against the outside, so the door resists, just as it did last evening, but with greater self-importance. He pushes. The bottom scrapes. Cold air slips in. He pushes again, shoulder to wood, and a wedge of white falls inward over the threshold. Morning enters. It's pale, blue-grey, and breathtakingly cold. You stand behind him and look out. The valley has changed. Every rough edge has been softened. The vineyard rows are low white ridges, their dark vine tips showing here and there like ink strokes through parchment. The road is gone. The village below is only a gathering of shapes, roofs rounded with snow, smoke rising straight in the still air. The church tower stands darker than everything else, solemn and slightly smug as churches often look in bad weather. The snow is deep enough to hide stones and low walls. It has drifted against the cottage, piled under the eaves, and settled thickly over the lean-to. The repaired vine tie from yesterday is invisible now, but you imagine it holding beneath its white burden. The air smells clean outside, almost painfully clean after the cottage. Snow, wood smoke, cold earth, and distant animals you breathe in, and the cold catches in your throat. Now the chores begin. A path must be cleared from the door, not beautifully, only enough to move. The man uses a wooden shovel or board to push snow aside. You help with your boots. Stamping and scraping. The snow squeaks underfoot, dry on top, wetter beneath. The woman checks the animals. The hen in the basket is uncovered and inspected. Mildly indignant but alive. If larger animals are nearby in a byre or shed, they must be fed, watered, and checked for cold, injury, or panic. Snowbound mourning can turn ordinary care into urgent work. Livestock are wealth, food, labour, and future security. A cow, goat, pig, or sheep is not just an animal in the modern sentimental sense. Though affection certainly happens, it is milk, wool, manure, meat, traction, breeding, rent value, and survival. Losing one in winter can harm a household for months or years. So the animals come early in the order of care, sometimes before human comfort. This is rude but economically sound. A thin bleat comes from the shed. The goat, of course. You remember yesterday's talk of a neighbour's goat as a community problem, and now this household's own goat appears entirely capable of legal controversy. It pushes its face toward the opening as snow is cleared, chewing with the calm arrogance of a creature who believes all stored food is merely delayed goat property. The woman gives it hay or dried fodder, measured carefully. Winter feed is limited. Animals cannot simply wander to lush pasture under a blanket of snow. Fodder must be cut, dried, stored and rationed, and every mouth matters. A rather odd practice from rural husbandry appears in old farming traditions. People sometimes read animal behaviour as weather prophecy. Restless cattle, birds flying low, pigs carrying straw, cats washing ears, and many other signs were taken as clues. Some observations had practical roots. Animals do respond to pressure, cold, sound, and instinct. Others were embroidered by the habit until the countryside became a very busy forecast service with feathers, hooves, and questionable accuracy. The woman glances at the goat and says something dry. "You do not need the words," the tone means, "if you know the weather. Kindly make yourself useful. There remains the matter of water. The household may have a nearby spring, well, or stream, but snow makes every trip harder. If the source is close, someone must go. If not, snow can be melted, though it takes fuel, and fuel is precious. You watch as clean snow is gathered from a place away from the threshold and animal tracks. It is packed into a pot and set near the fire to melt. The result will be much less water than the full pot promises, because snow is a master of looking abundant while being mostly air, a very medieval lesson in disappointment. People who study rural climate and agriculture continue to differ on how local communities adapted to harsh winters during the later Middle Ages, especially across regions affected by colder phases, wet years, or poor harvests. Some evidence points to flexible mixed farming, stored reserves, communal obligations, and local knowledge. Other evidence reminds us that resilience had limits. A long winter, failed crop, animal disease, or disrupted market could push families into real danger. This morning looks beautiful, yes, but beauty does not feed goats. You step toward the vineyard, only a few paces. The snow reaches above your ankles and hides the ground. The vines are burdened but not broken as far as you can see. Snow can insulate, but heavy accumulation can damage supports, especially if ice forms or wind follows. Later, when light improves, someone will check the rows more carefully. For now, the cottage, animals, fire, and water come first. The vineyard waits, because vines are patient and humans have cold hands. The church bell rings below, clearer now in the morning stillness. One note crosses the white valley, then another. Smoke rises from the village roofs, thin and vertical. Other households are waking into the same chores. Doors opening, paths cleared, animals fed, fires coaxed, children wrapped, old people warmed. The whole valley begins again, not with drama, but with repetition. You return inside, carrying cold on your sleeves. The fire has grown brighter. The snow in the pot begins to slump and shine. The child sits near the hearth with bread in hand, looking half dreaming, half hungry. The dog waits nearby with profound moral interest. The woman breaks the bread carefully. The man stamps snow from his boots and reaches for a tool. Morning is not gentle, but it is here. The cottage has lasted the night. The roof held, the embers survived. The stores remain beneath the floor. The animals breathe. The valley is buried, but not lost. And as pale light spreads over the snowbound vineyard, you feel the medieval day gather itself from ash, wool, water, and work, one careful chore at a time. The bread is divided, the snow in the pot slowly becomes water, and the morning's pale light spreads farther across the floor. It enters through the cracked shutter and the open doorway in thin strips, touching straw, boots, tools, and the edge of the cellar plank. The cottage looks different now that the night has loosened. Less mysterious, more worn, more human. Smoke-stained beams, patched walls, a damp cloak, a child with crumbs on the chin, a dog whose eyes follow every movement of food as if studying law. Outside, the valley waits under snow. You step through the doorway again, this time with better light and a sharper cold. The air pinches your nose, your breath rises white. The snow has stopped falling for the moment, leaving the whole slope in a bright hush. It is not sunny, not yet, but the clouds are thinner. The world has become one enormous quiet surface, marked only where life has already crossed it. Tracks begin at the threshold. Boot prints first. Yours and the man's from the morning clearing. Pressed deep near the door, messy where snow was pushed aside. Smaller marks nearby show where the woman stepped toward the shed. The dog has made a proud little path of paw prints looping unnecessarily around the doorway, as though patrolling an empire roughly the size of a blanket, beyond those familiar tracks. The snow becomes a page. You look down and try to read it. There are tiny paired prints near the wall. Mouse or vole leading from a gap under stacked wood to a place beneath the eaves. A bird has stitched delicate marks near a bush, then vanished upward, leaving 2 wing brushes where it launched. Farther away, a line of prints crosses the path, light, neat, and purposeful. Fox, perhaps. The man crouches and studies them. He touches the edge of one print with a gloved finger, then points toward the hen basket inside the cottage and gives a soft grunt. Not alarm, information. In a rural medieval landscape, animal tracks were not charming winter decoration. They were practical signs. People who worked fields, woods, vineyards, and paths needed to notice movement. Foxes threatened poultry. Wolves, in some regions and periods, threatened livestock and sometimes people. Those stories often made them larger than life. Deer, hares, boar, and smaller creatures could damage crops, reveal hunting opportunities, or signal who had passed where. Snow made the invisible visible, at least until wind or sun erased the evidence. You follow the fox line with your eyes. It slips along the vineyard edge, pauses near the shed, then angles away toward a hedgerow. The fox came close in the night. Perhaps that was the sound that woke the dog during your first sleep. Perhaps the dog's low growl really was useful after all. You glance back at him. He stands proudly in the doorway, chest forward as if awaiting public recognition. No one applauds, but he accepts the silence as admiration. The man continues along the cleared path. You go with him, stepping carefully. Snow hides stones, ruts, roots, old vine cuttings, and every ankle-twisting inconvenience the hillside has saved for morning. The vineyard terraces look like soft steps carved into the slope. Each row is partly buried, where a stake stands taller. Snow clings to one side, showing the direction of last night's wind. The vines themselves are black against white, bent and patient. Near one row, the man stops. A branch has fallen from a small tree beside the vineyard wall, not large enough to crush the vines, but heavy enough to pin a cane beneath it. He lifts it carefully, shakes snow from it, and drags it aside. The cane springs a little, unharmed or mostly so. You see him check the tied places by touch, not only by sight. Cold fingers can feel looseness where eyes miss it. Medieval vineyard workers depended on close observation through the year. They knew which slopes warmed first, where frost collected, where water ran, where stones held heat, where animals entered, and which vines suffered after bad weather. This knowledge was rarely written down by the ordinary hands that used it. It lived in routines, corrections, warnings, and gestures. A father telling a child not to step there. A worker noticing one darker patch of soil. A woman counting stores and remembering which rows yielded poorly. Much of rural expertise was memory with boots on. Another track crosses the terrace. This one is larger than the fox's, deeper, with a longer stride. The man studies it a moment. Dog. Perhaps, maybe from a neighbouring cottage, maybe a stray, maybe a wolf if the valley lies in a region where wolves still move through woodland and hill. The household does not turn this into theatre. It is noted. The direction is read. The weather is considered. The animals will be watched. Medieval fear can be practical rather than frantic. An unusual bit of winter lore fits this moment. Some countryside traditions treated snow tracks almost like messages, not only from animals but from luck, saints, spirits, or unseen travellers. A strange print near a door could become a story by noon. in places where people believed that the wild and supernatural pressed close to the household edge. The snow did not merely record paws and boots, it invited interpretation. Of course, sometimes the mysterious night visitor was just a goat. History is full of dramatic explanations defeated by goats. You reach the edge of the vineyard where the slope opens toward the lower fields. The valley below is clearer now. Smoke rises from several roofs. A dark thread of path begins to appear where villagers have already started pushing through snow. Near the road, tiny figures move slowly, bent against the cold, carrying bundles or tools. From this distance, they look almost weightless, but you know better. Each step is effort. Jegerand means wet hems, numb fingers, and the constant possibility of slipping in front of someone who will remember forever. The church tower stands in the centre of the village. Beside it, the graveyard is smoothed under white, stones and wooden markers softened into low shapes. Beyond that, fields lie hidden. The mill is down near the stream, its roof thick with snow. The stream itself shows in dark breaks where water still moves. If the freeze deepens, the mill may struggle if snowmelt comes quickly. Flooding may follow. Winter is not one problem, it is a committee of them. People who examine medieval rural landscapes do not always agree on how far peasants and workers move during heavy winter weather. Some sources suggest strong attachment to local spaces, with bad conditions narrowing daily movement. Other evidence shows trade, labour duties, pilgrimages, court attendance, and messenger travel continuing whenever necessity pushed hard enough. Snow did not stop the medieval world, it slowed it, reshaped it, and made every journey a calculation. You turn back toward the cottage. On the way, the man points to small marks near a low wall. Rabbit or hare, the difference matters if traps are set or gardens are at risk. Hares appear in medieval art and hunting culture, sometimes as food, sometimes as symbols, sometimes in wonderfully ridiculous manuscript scenes, where they take revenge on humans with weapons. Those drawings are not what you expect from monks in Quartz Scriptoria, but apparently even careful scribes enjoyed the idea of a rabbit having a very serious day. The child has come to the doorway now, wrapped in a blanket despite someone probably telling them to stay inside. The dog stands beside them like an official guardian. The woman calls a warning. The child points toward the snow near the shed, where a curious track loops and doubles back. The man looks, then laughs softly. Goat. Naturally. The goat has somehow pushed far enough from shelter to investigate the world, then decided the world was cold and returned, leaving a trail of self-important half-moons in the snow. Remember the goat with possible legal opinions. Here is the evidence. The woman shakes her head in the universal manner of people whose animals have never respected boundaries. You step inside again, carrying the morning on your boots. Snow falls from your soles onto the packed floor. The air of the cottage feels thick after the clean outside cold, but also forgiving. The fire has strengthened. The melted snow water steams faintly. The child returns to the hearth. The dog follows, pausing only to inspect your boots for news. The tracks remain outside, written across the white valley for a little while longer. Fox, bird, mouse, dog, goat, human. Each one marks a life moving through the same storm, seeking food, warmth, shelter, or mischief. The cottage is not separate from that world. It is one den among many, one warm hollow in a landscape full of hunger and habit. You settle near the fire and feel your face thaw again. Beyond the door, the snow page will blur as the day changes, wind will soften the prints, new feet will cross the old ones, water will drip from the eaves, the vineyard will keep its secrets under white for another hour, perhaps another day, but for now, you have read a little of the valley's morning script, and it tells you that the night was never empty. It was full of passing lives, quiet pause, watchful eyes, and the soft, readable evidence of survival. The morning tracks remain in your mind as you sit again near the hearth, warming your hands above the fire. Outside, fox, bird, mouse, goat, and human have written their brief histories in the snow. Inside, another kind of record is being made, quieter and easier to miss. It is the record of hands at work before anyone calls it work. The woman lifts a basket close to her knees, takes up a spindle, and the cottage begins to turn, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a twist of fingers, a pull of fibre, a small weighted spindle dropping and spinning, gathering thread from wool. The movement is so practiced that it seems almost like breathing. Draw the wool, twist, let it turn, wind the thread, begin again. The child watches for a moment, then loses interest because repetition is only beautiful once you have had enough life to respect it. You watch longer. The wool in the basket is not the soft, clean cloud you might imagine from a craft shop. It carries bits of straw, lanolin, and the faint animal smell of sheep. It has been washed or picked over to some degree, perhaps carded, perhaps not perfectly. Preparing fibre takes time: shearing, sorting, washing, drying, combing or carding, spinning, weaving, fulling, sewing, mending. A finished garment is not a simple object, it is time made wearable. Across medieval Europe, textile work consumed enormous amounts of household labour, and much of it fell to women and girls, though men also participated in parts of the trade, especially in organised urban production. In rural homes, spinning could continue during conversations, childcare, watching a pot, waiting out weather, or walking short distances. Thread was always needed, cloth was valuable. A torn sleeve was not an inconvenience solved by a quick purchase. It was a task returning to the fire. The spindle spins, it hums faintly. A tiny wooden planet turning beside her knee. The sound joins the crackle of twigs, the wet drip from melting snow near the doorway, and the goat chewing somewhere beyond the wall with the self-satisfaction of a minor prince. The woman's face is calm, but her eyes move around the room constantly. Fire, child, pot, door, basket, blanket, tool, guest, dog, crumbs. Nothing escapes her for long. Beside her lies a garment needing repair, a tunic. Perhaps a sleeve has split near the seam. The fabric is patched already in 2 places. The patches different shades because good cloth lives many lives here. She sets down the spindle, takes the garment, and studies it. There is no sigh of despair, only judgment. Where is the cloth weakest? Can the seam be closed? Does it need a patch? Is the patch worth the thread? How visible will the repair be? Will anyone care? Will it last through pruning, through spring mud, through another winter? You think of the vineyard outside, vines tied so they do not break. Inside, cloth is tied, stitched, strengthened, made to survive strain. The same logic governs both. Nothing is new for long, everything must be maintained. A strange little custom appears in old household practice and belief thread. Knots and spinning could carry meanings beyond clothing. In stories, charms, and folk habits, knots might bind illness, protect against harm, or hold memory. Spinning itself could be associated with fate, women's knowledge, saints, and dangerous magic in different contexts. Naturally, most spinning was just spinning, because people needed socks more often than enchantments. Still, when a spindle turns in dim firelight while snow buries the valley, it is easy to understand why imagination gathered around it. The child is given a small task, not a pretend task, a real one, scaled to smaller fingers, sorting kindling, picking bits from wool, holding thread, fetching a bowl, moving crumbs away from the dog's hopeful face. Medieval children worked early by modern standards, though play and affection certainly existed. Childhood was not simply ignored, but it was woven into household usefulness. A child learned by doing, watching, being corrected, and being given the kind of small responsibility that eventually becomes invisible skill. The child drops a piece of kindling. The dog investigates. The woman says one word. Both child and dog freeze. Authority has spoken, and it did not require volume. Near the hearth, a small brewing vessel or bucket is checked. In many rural households, ale or small beer, cider, or other fermented drinks were made domestically depending on region and ingredients. Brewing was often women's work in household settings, though commercial brewing could become more specialised and male-dominated in some towns over time, even here in wine country. The making and managing of drink belongs to daily survival. Fermentation is not just celebration. It is storage, calories, hydration, and occasionally a reason to smile at the end of a terrible day. The woman lifts a cloth covering one vessel and smells it. Her expression changes only slightly. You cannot tell if that means success, failure, or this will do because winter does not accept complaints. She replaces the cloth and sets a weight on it. The smell that escapes is yeasty, sour, warm, and faintly sweet. It mingles with wool and smoke until the cottage seems to contain every domestic process at once: cooking, drying, mending, brewing, warming, storing, teaching, watching. People sometimes write history as if public events are the main events. Kings, battles, treaties, councils, laws are important. Yes, very shiny in textbooks. But this room suggests another truth. If the wool is not spun, there is no cloth. If the cloth is not mended, cold enters through sleeves. If food is not measured, hunger arrives early. If drink is not managed, stores sour. If children are not taught, skill thins. If the fire is not watched, mourning punishes everyone. The household is not background to history. It is the machine that lets history have breakfast. Those who study women's labour in medieval villages often face a stubborn problem. The work that kept households alive was everywhere, yet not always written down in proportion to its importance. Legal records may name women when they inherit, marry, offend, brew for sale, pay fines, bear witness, or appear in disputes, household tasks. However, often remain hidden because they were expected. Expected work has a way of becoming invisible, which is convenient for records and deeply unfair to the people doing it. The woman threads the needle. The needle itself is precious, iron or bronze, depending on type and means, small enough to lose and important enough to cause immediate household tragedy if lost in straw. She pinches the torn seam and begins to stitch. Her hands are rough, reddened from cold and water, but precise. The thread slips in and out. The tear closes slowly. It is not delicate embroidery. It is repair that intends to hold. You notice a small pouch near her basket. Inside are scraps, little pieces of cloth, saved at ends of thread, perhaps buttons, pins, bickers of cord, and other humble treasures. Nothing large enough to look impressive. Everything useful enough to keep. The pouch is a museum of not wasting things. A modern drawer full of random cables has the same spiritual ancestor, though far less dignity. The child hums under their breath. The tune may be from church, from a seasonal song, from a mother's repetition, or from no formal place at all. Work often carries rhythm. Spinning likes rhythm, kneading likes rhythm, sweeping, hoeing, pruning, and carrying baskets all find patterns. In winter, when outdoor labour slows but never disappears, indoor rhythm holds the day together. A pot is moved nearer the heat for a thin morning meal. Bread is softened. Perhaps porridge is stirred. The woman does this while keeping the needle tucked safely, the spindle within reach, and the child employed. You feel, with some humility, that you would require a written schedule, 3 alarms, and moral support to manage what she does while apparently just sitting by the fire. The man enters with snow on his boots and a tool in his hand. He speaks briefly about the shed, the vine row, the goat, and something near the wall that needs attention later. She listens while stitching, She asks one question. He answers. Between them, the day takes shape. Who goes out? What waits? What must be used before it spoils? Whether the weather allows a trip below? Whether the child stays close? Whether the neighbour mentioned last night may need help? No one calls this planning. It simply happens. The repaired tunic is shaken once, folded, and set aside. The spindle returns to motion. The thread lengthens. Outside, snow rests on the vines. Inside, wool becomes thread, thread becomes cloth, cloth becomes warmth. Warmth becomes sleep, and sleep becomes another morning of work. The circle is not romantic, exactly, but it is steady. You sit quietly, letting the small sounds draw around you. Spindle turning, needle pulling, child humming, pot simmering, dog sighing, fire breathing. The cottage no longer feels like a pause from history. It feels like history at its most intimate size, measured not in crowns or wars, but in stitches, crumbs, knots, and the careful counting of winter stores. And as the woman's hands continue their calm, endless labour beside the hearth, you understand that the valley survives not only because vines grow and barrels fill, but because someone, in the smoky morning after a storm, keeps mending what the world wears thin. The spindle turns, the needle rests, and the cottage holds its morning warmth a little more confidently now. Outside, snow lies deep along the vineyard terraces, smoothing the land into soft white shapes. Inside, the household has counted itself awake, fire alive, child fed, goat contained for the moment, dog present and morally available, tools near the door, stores still hidden below the floor. It would be easy, in the quiet of this room, to imagine the cottage as its own little kingdom, but it is not. Beyond the hearth, beyond the door bar, beyond the vineyard rows buried under snow, other powers reach in. They do not need to enter dramatically. They do not need boots at the threshold or a loud voice in the lane. They are already here in the measure of grain owed, the share of wine due, the days of labour promised, the tithe expected, the rights granted or withheld, and the fear of being called to account when the weather has already taken enough. The man takes a small piece of wood from a peg near the wall. It has marks cut into it. Or perhaps he checks a notched stick kept with other household reminders. The woman looks up from her work, and for a moment their faces share the same calculation. Not panic, calculation. There is a difference. Panic burns too hot. Calculation survives winter. In many medieval rural communities, peasants and tenants owed a mixture of obligations that could include rents in money or produce, labour services, fees for using mills or presses, and payments connected to marriage, inheritance, or land transfers. The exact pattern depended heavily on region, century, legal status, and local custom. A vineyard worker might owe wine, grapes, coin, labour, carting, or access fees, and the person collecting those dues might be a lord, monastery, bishop, town authority, or another landholder. The snow outside is quiet, but the social world beneath it is anything but simple. You look toward the cellar plank. Those barrels below are not only food and drink, they may also be promises. Some portion may belong elsewhere before the household drinks a cup. That is a hard thought when the wind is cold and the stores are finite. Imagine guarding a barrel through rot, mice, damp, bad hoops, souring and theft, only to watch the better part carried away because custom says it must go. Cozy bedtime content, yes, but history does enjoy placing a tax collector beside the blanket. The man sets the marked wood down, the woman resumes spinning, but more slowly for a few breaths. The church bell sounds faintly from the village, thin through morning air. Its voice reminds you of another claim on the household, the church. Tithes, often imagined as a tenth of produce, could support parish clergy and ecclesiastical institutions, though collection practices varied greatly and were often contested. Wine-producing areas might owe tithes in grapes or wine. The parish church gave sacraments, marked seasons, buried the dead, rang the bells, blessed fields, and gathered the community. It also expected its due. Spiritual care and material obligation sat together, not always comfortably, in the same pew. A small pouch appears from a chest. Inside are a few coins, dull and precious. They are handled carefully, counted once, counted again, then returned. Coins in a rural household may not be abundant, especially where rents and exchanges still involve produce and labour. But money matters increasingly in many later medieval regions. Markets, wages, commutations of labour services, taxes, fees, tools, salt, cloth, and legal costs all require coin at different times. A single small silver piece can carry a surprising amount of anxiety. The child watches the counting with wide eyes. The dog watches too, though he appears disappointed by the lack of crumbs. A rather odd feature of medieval lordship is how many rights could be attached to ordinary acts. Grinding grain might require the lord's mill. Baking bread might be tied to an oven in some places. Pressing grapes could involve a lordly or communal press with fees. Even keeping certain animals, gathering wood, fishing, cutting turf, or using pasture could be governed by custom to a modern mind. This can feel like being charged by the universe for existing to the medieval household. It was the structure of life, resented, negotiated, endured, and sometimes used strategically. The man speaks of the press. You catch the word because he gestures, pressing his hands down together. The great press may not sit at this cottage. It might belong to a lord, a monastery, a village community, or a better equipped neighbour. Harvest, when it comes, will draw grapes toward that place. Pressing is crucial, and control over the press means control over timing, quality, fees, and shares. A household can tend vines all year, but if the press is d'abord crowded, costly, or controlled by someone unsympathetic, autumn becomes a bottleneck with wooden beams. People who study these arrangements often disagree about whether such obligations crushed rural households or whether customary rights also gave them some protection against arbitrary demands. Custom could bind the peasant, yes, but it could also bind the lord. A tenant might appeal to what had always been done, call neighbours as witnesses, resist new exactions, or use the manor court to defend rights. The system was unequal. No question. But unequal does not mean scient. Rural people argued, remembered, complained, bargained, and occasionally made officials regret waking up that morning. The woman ties off her thread with a sharp little tug. It is the kind of movement that suggests she has opinions about officials. Snow slides from the roof outside in a soft, heavy fall. Everyone pauses. The door holds. The goat bleats once from the shed, perhaps reporting injustice. Then the room resumes. This, too, feels like a lesson. Storm, duty, lordship, hunger, animal nonsense. All arriving in turns. The household cannot choose the world, but it can keep answering it. The man pulls on his outer layer, stiff from drying. He may need to check a boundary marker later, or clear snow from a path that leads toward the lower road, or meet someone if the weather lifts. Boundaries matter. A strip of vineyard, a right of way, a shared wall, a ditch, a terrace edge, a stand of trees, a path to water, all can become sources of conflict. The medieval countryside is not vague open land. It is mapped by memory, marks, stones, hedges, charters, witness testimony, and argument. You imagine the manor court. Not a grand courtroom, but a local gathering where tenants, officials, and neighbours address disputes, obligations, fines, transfers, and custom. Someone's pig trespassed. Someone failed to repair a ditch. Someone brewed or sold against regulation. Someone owed work. Someone inherited land. Someone insulted someone else in a way memorable enough to enter the record. These courts could be instruments of lordly control, but also places where villagers pursued claims against one another. Community life was legal life, whether anyone felt festive about it or not. The cottage suddenly feels less isolated. The walls are smoke-dark and close, but the room is tied to ledgers, courts, bells, presses, mills, roads, and offices. The barrel below belongs partly to the season, partly to the household, partly to whoever has the right to collect from it. The bread in the child's hand belongs to the field, the mill, the oven, the tithe, the labourer, the mother who saved the heel, and the dog who sincerely believes in redistribution. A faint smile passes through you. The dog's politics are simple. The woman notices the child dropping crumbs and gives the dog a warning glance before the revolution begins. The man opens the door for a moment to judge the sky. Pale light reflects from the snow, filling the room with a cold glow. Down the slope, the village chimney smoke rise. Somewhere there, a reeve or bailiff may be thinking about dues, repairs, or labour schedules. Somewhere else, a priest may be thinking about offerings, Mass, and the condition of the church roof. The cottage sits above them in the vineyard, but not outside their reach. Still, the hearth remains real. The obligations are real too, but so are the hands that meet them. The woman's spinning, the man's checking of vines, the child's little tasks, the tending of animals, the guarding of stores, the reading of tracts, the saving of embers. These are not passive gestures beneath authority. They are active acts of endurance. The household is constrained but not empty, pressed but not erased. You sit with that thought as the door closes again. The bar falls into place. Outside, the manor's long shadow lies invisible across the snow, stretching from court and to church, from press and mill, from custom and rent, all the way to this smoky room. But inside, the fire burns on, modest and stubborn. The household counts what it owes. Yes, it also counts what it has. And in winter, under a roof that still holds. That second counting may be the one that carries everyone into evening. The door bar settles, and the thought of dues and courts fades back into the ordinary warmth of the room. Not gone, of course. Obligations do not vanish because the fire is pleasant. They simply step aside for the next need. And the next need is always close. The child wants food. The goat wants everything. The man wants the weather to lift. The woman wants the thread not to tangle. You, having spent one night on straw, want your hip to forgive you before spring. Yet beneath the practical morning there is another rhythm. Softer but powerful. The year is not only measured by pruning, harvest, rent days, and storms. It is also measured by feasts, holy days, candle-lit services, songs known by people who may not read a line of Latin, but know when the church season has turned. Even deep winter, with its hard bread and cautious firewood, has bright points set into it like embers under ash. The woman reaches into a covered basket and takes out something wrapped in cloth. The child notices immediately. Children everywhere are scholars of hidden treats. The dog notices too, though his research standards are broader. The cloth is opened, and inside are a few small preserved fruits or spiced crumbs, perhaps saved from a feast day, perhaps meant for one soon to come. They are not abundant. They do not need to be. A small sweetness in winter can change the shape of a morning. You breathe in dried fruit, smoke, wool, and the faint warmth of yeast. Maybe figs or raisins if trade has brought them this far, and the household had access through market. Manor, monastery, or gift. More likely dried apples, pears, plums, or grapes from nearer fields and orchards, a bit of honeyed cake in a better year, a special loaf, a handful of nuts, in a cottage. Celebration often comes in small portions and great attention. The medieval calendar was crowded with religious observances, and winter held some of the most emotionally important. Advent, Christmas, St. Stephen's Day, the Feast of the Holy Innocents, New Year customs, Epiphany, Candlemas, and many local saints' days could shape the season differently by region. The church year gave structure to time. It told people when to fast, when to feast, when to light candles, when to process, when to sing, and when to remember that winter was not endless, even when it was doing a very convincing impression. A bit of the preserved fruit is given to the child. The child eats it slowly this time, perhaps under instruction, perhaps because even a child understands that rare sweetness should last longer than 3 heartbeats. The dog sits with saintly restraint. His eyes, however, are committing several sins. The man smiles and sees something about a feast in the village, or one from years past. His words bring a change to the room. The cottage in your mind fills with remembered sound bells ringing brighter. People moving through snow in their best available clothing, not necessarily fine, but brushed, patched, shaken, and arranged with care. A church interior smelling of wax, damp wool, incense if the parish has it, cold stone and human breath, candles trembling in rows, a priest's voice rising in Latin, familiar even where the words are not fully understood, children fidgeting, old women praying with impressive focus, men shifting from foot to foot, pretending they are not cold. A little-known winter custom from many medieval and later European communities involved forms of festive inversion, begging, singing from door to door, blessing houses, or choosing playful figures such as a boy bishop in certain cathedral and parish settings. Not every village practiced the same customs, and church authorities sometimes frowned at the rowdier versions. Naturally, people often preserved the fun parts with great devotion. Give a community 1 grey season, 1 barrel of drink, and permission to sing, and order becomes negotiable. The woman begins to hum. It is barely more than breath at first. Then the child joins with a thinner version of the tune. You do not know the words, but the shape feels seasonal. It rises gently, turns, and settles. Perhaps it is a carol. Though medieval carols were not always the soft holiday songs modern people imagine. Some were dance songs with refrains, some were devotional. Some were lively enough to make a churchman raise an eyebrow. Song travels well because it does not require parchment. It lives in mouths, memory, and repetition. You listen without moving. The storm has left the valley muffled, but the song opens a small space inside the cottage. Not grand joy, not cinematic triumph. Something humbler. A reminder that the year has ceremonies even when the cupboard is watched carefully. The same hands that count coins and mend sleeves also save a sweet scrap for a feast. Polish a cup, light a candle, and remember a tune. Questions remain among researchers about how strictly rural people observed fasting rules during hard seasons when food choices were already limited. Church law might distinguish meat days, fish days, fast days, and feast days, but local practice depended on access, wealth, pastoral oversight, and necessity. A vineyard household snowbound above a valley may have known the rule, respected the season, and still made practical choices when the goat was hungry. The child was thin, and the road to market had vanished under snow. Medieval life was devout, but it was not always tidy. The mention of candles draws your attention to a small stub near the hearth. It is precious, burned down almost to nothing. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, were cheaper than beeswax, but smoky and smelly. Beeswax candles burned cleaner and were favoured in churches, but wax was costly. Candlemas, celebrated in early February, involved the blessing of candles and marked a turning point in the winter season, near the time when light begins noticeably to strengthen. Imagine holding a blessed candle while the world outside remains frozen. A small flame can become a whole argument against despair. The child reaches toward the candle stub. The woman moves it away without breaking the song. Efficient holiness, safely managed. The man speaks of the church feast again, and this time you catch something about wine. Of course, in a vineyard region. Holy days and wine belong together in complicated ways. Wine is sacramental at the altar, social at the table, commercial in the cellar, taxable in the accounts, medicinal in advice and dangerous in sermons if enjoyed too enthusiastically. It can bless, cheer, heal, impoverish, and embarrass, sometimes in the same afternoon. You remember the sour cup from last night and wonder whether feast wine tastes better, or whether everyone simply agrees to be more generous in description. A feast day does not necessarily mean abundance for all. It may mean a slightly better loaf, a shared drink, a bit of cheese, a song, a candle, a visit, a church service, a pause from certain labours if weather and obligation allow. The difference between ordinary and special can be very small materially, yet enormous emotionally. Outside, the sun almost appears, not fully. A pale brightness gathers behind the clouds and makes the snow shine. The cottage fills with reflected light, cold but beautiful for a moment. The smoke in the room turns silver. The spinning thread glows. The child's face brightens. The dog, unable to appreciate theology, sneezes. The woman laughs softly. That laugh belongs with the song. You can feel how feast days soften the edges of winter, not by removing hardship, but by giving it punctuation. A hard month with no holy day is only endurance. A hard month with candles, bells, songs, saints, and one preserved plum becomes a story people can move through. Time gains doorways. The body may still be cold, but the mind is given a small procession to follow. The song ends. No one applauds. That would be strange here. The tune simply rests, and the morning sounds return fire, wool, goat, melting snow, distant bell, the low scrape of a stool. The child licks a sticky finger. The dog watches the finger with deep concern. The woman wraps the remaining treat again, because feast brightness must be stretched carefully across days. You sit in the smoky quiet and understand that celebration here is not an escape from medieval life. It is one of the tools for surviving it, like the fire stick, the spindle, the cellar, the door bar, the stitch patch, and the remembered path through snow. A feast day is practical in its own way. It keeps hope from spoiling. It reminds the valley to gather. It lets the poor taste sweetness. The tired sing. The church bells speak above the weather, and the long winter loosen its grip for the length of a candle flame. Outside, the vineyard remains buried. Inside, the last note of the song seems to linger in the rafters, mingling with smoke and morning light, holding the cottage gently between hunger and holiness. The song thins into the rafters, and the little wrapped sweetness returns to its basket, saved for a better moment or a worse one. In a cottage like this, those can be the same thing. The morning carries on, but more slowly now, as if the storm has left everyone with a careful heaviness. The child leans against the woman's knee, not fully ill, not fully lively. The man notices. The woman notices before he does. You notice because the room changes around small signs. A hand touches the child's forehead. Not dramatic, just the back of the fingers, laid lightly against skin. The child blinks and submits to this ancient inspection with poor grace. The woman feels the cheeks, looks at the eyes, listens to the breath. Then she reaches for a cup and gives a little warm liquid, perhaps watered wine, thin ale, or an herbal infusion if something useful hangs among the dried bundles. The child drinks, makes a face, and is immediately more convincing as a patient. The dog tries to look concerned. He is mostly interested in whether illness comes with crumbs. You remain near the hearth, watching the small household shift into another mode of care. The cottage has dealt with weather, hunger, cold animals, sleep, duties, and celebration. Now it turns toward the body itself, that fragile tenant no lord can fully manage. A chill, a cough, a fever, an ache in the joints, a bad tooth, a cut that reddens, a stomach that rebels after questionable water. All of these belong to winter as surely as snow belongs on the roof. Medieval medicine was not one single system. Learned physicians might speak of humours, complexions, diet, astrology, urine examination, and ancient authorities. Monks, nuns, barber surgeon, midwives, wise neighbours, household healers, apothecaries, priests, and family members all played roles depending on place, wealth, urgency, and access. In a vineyard cottage above a snowbound valley, the first healer is often whoever is already by the fire and knows where the herbs are kept. The woman takes down a small bundle, dried leaves and stems, tied with thread, brittle from hanging in smoke-dark air. You cannot identify them with certainty. Sage, hyssop, thyme, mint, elderflower, yarrow, chamomile, or some local plant known by smell, season, and inherited advice. Medieval herbals described many plants, but rural practice didn't always require a written book. Knowledge could be carried in hands, gardens, memory, and the phrase, my mother used this. That phrase has probably treated more sore throats than any royal physician. She crumbles a little into hot water. Steam rises, greener and sharper than pottage steam, with a scent that clears the nose for one brief, hopeful second. The child receives the cup and looks betrayed. This, too, is a universal part of healing. The medicine may be mild, but the facial expression is timeless. You're offered a sip after the child has been persuaded. It tastes bitter, smoky, and plant-like, which is to say it tastes as if someone believes it will help. Warmth spreads through your mouth and throat. Whether the herb has a measurable effect or not, the act itself matters. Warm liquid, attention, rest, reassurance, a pause in work. Sometimes care is partly chemistry, partly ritual, and partly the feeling that someone has noticed you are not well. A curious habit from older healing traditions is the use of written or spoken charms alongside practical remedies. A person might apply an herb, bind a wound, recite sacred words, make the sign of the cross, or use a prayer formula invoking Christ. Mary, or a saint. To modern categories, this looks like mixing medicine and magic. To many medieval people, the separation was not so neat. Words could act, blessings could protect, herbs could warm or dry, God could heal through means both ordinary and mysterious. The man rubs his wrist near the fire. Perhaps it aches from cold work among the vines. He flexes the fingers, opens and closes them, then holds them over the heat. Pruning, tying, digging, hauling, pressing, carrying baskets, clearing snow. All of it works itself into the joints. Medieval labour leaves marks in the body, bent backs, thickened hands, worn teeth from coarse bread, smoke-irritated eyes, chilblained finger, feet shaped by boots and paths. Sleep on straw might be the gentle part, which is a horrifying thought for your hip. The woman notices his wrist and says something. He shrugs. This is not a refusal of care so much as a performance of endurance. The household cannot stop because a wrist hurts. Yet she reaches for a small pot of fat or salve and gives it to him. He rubs it into the skin with brief, practical motions. It may be animal fat mixed with herbs, or simply grease to protect cracked skin, if it helps. Good. If it does not, at least the hand is warmer. Those who reconstruct medieval healthcare often caution against imagining either total ignorance or secret modern wisdom hidden in every remedy. Some treatments were sensible, some were useless, some were dangerous, some worked for reasons people explain differently than we would. A warm poultice can soothe, honey can help wounds, certain herbs have real effects, other recipes, involving strange animal substances or elaborate charms, make you grateful for pharmacies and peer review. The past deserves respect, not blind trust with your sinuses. The child coughs once, everyone listens. It is not deep, not frightening, but it earns attention. Winter coughs could become serious quickly, especially in crowded, smoky homes. Smoke kept people warm and helped preserve things, but it also irritated lungs. Dampness chilled bedding. Poor nutrition weakened bodies. Close living spread illness. The cottage is shelter. But it is not a sealed sanctuary. It protects and burdens at the same time. A bowl of warm mash is prepared for the child. Softer than bread, easier to swallow. The woman blows across it before offering a spoonful. The child resists, then accepts, then decides perhaps illness is tolerable if it improves the texture of breakfast. The dog watches this development carefully. Soft food interests him greatly. The man checks the doorway again and looks toward the village. If the child worsened, help might be sought. A neighbour known for remedies, the priest for prayers or sacrament if fear grew, a better supplied household for something unclear here, a healer in the village or town if reachable. But snow makes distance heavier. Illness in winter is never only a bodily matter. It becomes a problem of roads, fuel, money, reputation, and timing. You think of the tracks outside, already fading in brightness as cloud returns. A fox can cross the snow for hunger, a neighbour can cross it for duty, but a sick person must wait inside, wrapped in wool, judged by forehead, breath, appetite, and the experience of those who have seen many winters. There is another kind of rest here, separate from sleep, rest as treatment, rest as luxury, rest as necessity reluctantly allowed. The child is tucked again near the hearth, not sent to sort kindling for now. The blanket is pulled higher. The dog attempts to join and is corrected. He retreats 3 inches, which he considers full compliance. The room softens around the small patient. The spindle resumes, but more quietly. The man works a cord between his fingers, testing knots. The woman watches the child while appearing to watch the thread. Outside, snow slides from a branch. Inside, the herbal steam fades into the smell of smoke and wool. The cottage has become a sick room without changing shape. Questions remain difficult around how ordinary medieval people understood the boundary between natural illness and spiritual danger. A fever might be treated with cooling foods, prayer, charms, rest, bleeding in some contexts, or a visit to a shrine if means allowed. Illness could be bodily imbalance, divine trial, infection without a germ theory, bad air, weather effect, or moral warning depending on the interpreter. In practice, people often use many routes at once when someone you love is sick. Philosophical consistency is less important than trying everything that seems merciful. The child's eyes close, not dangerously, sleepily. The woman keeps her hand near the small shoulder until the breathing steadies. The man stops rubbing his wrist. The fire gives a low crackle. You feel your own body respond to the room's quiet, the way humans become hushed around rest that needs protecting. The storm has taught the cottage how to endure. The feast song taught it how to remember brightness. Now illness teaches it tenderness. Not the grand kind carved into legends, but the small kind, a cup cooled before drinking, a blanket tucked, a bitter herb disguised with warmth, a sore wrist noticed without fuss, a dog kept just far enough away from the patient's bowl. You draw the wool around yourself and breathe in the fading herbal steam. The valley outside remains white and cold. The vines sleep under snow. The village roofs smoke in the distance somewhere. Bells will ring again somewhere. A neighbour will cough. A healer will grind leaves. A priest will speak a blessing. And another household will lean close over someone warm with fever or chilled with age. Here, in the Vineyard Cottage, the child sleeps on, the fire holds, and the old uncertain medicine of care continues, gentle, imperfect, and deeply human. The child sleeps with the softened heaviness of someone warmed by fire, blanket, and attention. The bitter herb has done what it can, or at least it has joined the grand old army of things people do, because care needs action. The woman listens for a little longer, measuring the small breaths. Then, satisfied for now, She returns the cup to the hearth edge and lets the room widen again. Outside, the light has changed. Not brighter exactly, but thinner, as if the clouds have begun to loosen their grip on the valley. The storm has moved on across the hills, leaving snow behind like a long white apology. From the doorway, you see a faint shine along the terraces. Meltwater is beginning its first quiet work at the edges of things. A drop falls from the eaves, then another, then several together, quick and bright. The thaw has not arrived fully. Winter does not surrender after one polite suggestion, but the cottage can feel the difference. The roof releases small slides of snow with soft thumps. The shutter cloth grows damp where the sunless brightness touches it. The path cleared earlier becomes darker, packed underfoot. From the shed comes the smell of hay, goat, and wet wood. The world is still frozen, but it is no longer sealed. The man lifts a tool and nods toward the vineyard. You go with him, stepping into the air that now bites less sharply. Cold remains. Of course, it slides into your sleeves, pinches your fingers, and reminds you that optimism should wear boots. Yet the silence has changed. There is dripping everywhere, from eaves, branches, stakes, vines. The low wall, the shed roof, the whole valley seems to be counting itself back into motion. The snow underfoot is crusted in places and soft in others. Each step requires attention. You follow the man along the terrace, where the rows emerge more clearly than they did at dawn. Dark vines show through the white. Some canes bend under lingering weight. A few ties have loosened. Near one stake, ice has formed around a knot of willow binding, glossy and hard as glass. The man touches it, waits, and decides not to force it yet. A frozen tie can break if handled badly. Patience is not laziness, it is damage prevention. Vineyard work after winter weather often begins with inspection rather than action. A worker checks supports, drainage, broken wood, animal damage, frost pockets, and paths. Pruning might be done in dormancy, but timing matters, and late frosts can threaten early growth. Terraced vineyards require special attention because water running down a slope can erode soil, undermine walls, expose roots, and carry away the careful labour of years. Snow is beautiful. Meltwater is a sneaky accountant. You reach a shallow channel beside the row. It's partly blocked with slush, leaves, and small stones. The man crouches and clears it with the tool, opening a path for meltwater to run away from the vine roots and terrace wall. The water begins to move at once, a thin brown thread under the snow. It makes a faint sound, almost musical. You watch it slide into the lower channel, carrying specks of soil and old leaf matter. This is not glamorous work. It's exactly the sort of task that decides whether the vineyard wakes well in spring. A small bit of older vineyard lore belongs here. Growers in many regions watched frost, birds, flowering times, moon phases, saint days, and local signs when planning work. Some calendars linked agricultural tasks to feast days, not because vines were reading the saint's calendar, but because people needed memory anchors across the year. A saying might tell when to prune, when to fear frost, when to expect sap, when to prepare for harvest. Some sayings were useful, some were poetic, some were probably just a confident elder winning an argument. The man gestures to a low place between rows. Cold air settles there. You can feel it even now, a slightly sharper pocket against your knees. Frost behaves like water in that way, flowing downhill and pooling in hollows. Growers learn which parts of a vineyard suffer first. A slope may save one row and punish another. The same storm can be mild at the cottage, cruel below the wall, and harmless by the church road. Weather is local, petty, and very fond of proving experts wrong. You bend to brush snow from one vine. The bark is rough beneath your fingers, ridged and dark beneath that quiet surface. The plant waits. Its life is hidden now, drawn inward, later. As warmth lengthens, sap will rise, buds will swell, small green tips will appear with almost absurd bravery. Then everyone will worry about frost again, because hope is apparently not allowed to travel unattended. The question of how medieval growers understood plant physiology remains complicated. They did not speak in modern botanical terms, but they observed dormancy, sap flow, pruning response, soil differences, and weather effects with great care. Their explanations might involve humours, qualities of heat and moisture, divine order, lunar timing, or inherited craft knowledge. The language differs from ours, the attention does not. A person does not need modern science to know that cutting the wrong wood at the wrong time can ruin fruit. The sun almost breaks through, a pale disk glows behind the clouds, and the snow brightens until your eyes narrow. The vineyard becomes a field of soft light and black lines. Across the valley, smoke rises more steadily now. You can see people moving along the lower road, pushing through drifts. One figure stops near a hedge, then waves toward another. Sound comes late and faint, a call perhaps, a laugh, perhaps the valley is returning to itself. The man straightens and rubs his wrist. The one treated earlier with salve. He does it without thinking. The day's work has only begun, and already the body is keeping account. You remember the woman's hand on the child's forehead, the bitter steam, the careful mending, the rapt sweetness, the counted coins. Everything returns body. Duty, hope, weather, debt, fire, vine. Nothing disappears simply because the snow is pretty. You move to the next row. A stake has tilted outward. The man packs snow away from its base, exposing dark, wet soil. He presses the stake back and wedges stones around it. Later, when the ground softens, it may need deeper repair. For now, it must stand. The vine tied to it depends on that support, and the row depends on the line, and the harvest depends on 100 small things not failing at once. The terrace wall below has lost a little face stone. You both look at it. He sighs. A wall is work stored in stones. When one part slips, the slope begins to ask questions. Repair can wait until conditions improve. But it cannot be forgotten. In wine regions with steep land, maintaining terraces could take as much wisdom as tending plants. Soil that slides downhill does not politely climb back up by itself. Someone carries it, shovels it, holds it, curses it, and builds again. A robin or small winter bird lands on a vine stake. Its breast is a warm note against the cold field. It tilts its head toward you, then flicks away. Birds in vineyards can be friends, pests, omens, or meals, depending on season, species, hunger. And who is telling the story? In autumn, birds eating grapes may be cursed with feeling. In winter, one little bird on a stake can look like a promise that the world has not ended. The man watches it go. Then he turns back to the drainage channel. You help clear another blockage. Your fingers grow cold. Wet snow soaks your cuff. Mud appears beneath white, rich and dark and faintly sour with old leaves. The smell rises, earthy and waking. It is the first smell of spring pretending to be accidental. Down the slope, a bell rings from the church. Not evening now, not night watch, but daytime order returning. The sound travels cleanly through the thawing air. It crosses fields, roofs, walls, vines, and snow. The man pauses at the note, then resumes. The bell does not stop the work. It places the work within the day. You look back at the cottage. Smoke rises from the roof. The door stands partly open. The woman is a dark shape at the threshold, shaking something out into the cold. The child remains inside, hopefully sleeping. The dog has come only far enough to supervise from the path, which is wise, since his paws would sink unpleasantly in the slush. He looks important and slightly damp. The vineyard seems less asleep now, not awake. Not yet, but loosening. Water runs under snow. Stakes reappear. Dark wood sheds white clumps. The terrace channels begin to speak. Beneath the frozen surface, the year has turned its head towards spring by the smallest possible degree. You can feel why people watched these changes with such intensity. A thaw is not just nicer weather. It is information. It tells you what broke, what held, what must be repaired, and what might still live. The man taps mud from his tool and begins the slow walk back. You follow, carrying cold in your sleeves and the smell of wet earth on your hands. Behind you, the vineyard drains, drips, and waits. Ahead, the cottage glows with smoke and fire, a low shelter against the white slope. The valley is still winter, but winter has a seam in it now, a fine dark line where water moves. And as you step back inside, leaving the thaw to travel carefully through the terraces, you understand that spring in this place does not arrive as a bloom. It begins as a drip, a cleared channel, a straightened stake, and a tired worker looking at the snow and deciding what can be saved. You return from the terraces with wet cuffs, cold fingers, and the smell of dark soil clinging to your hands. The cottage takes you in again with its familiar smoky breath. After the sharp outdoor air, the room feels close, almost thick, but not unkind. The fire has strengthened. The child still sleeps near the hearth, cheeks less flushed now, one hand open on the blanket. The woman glances once, then back to her work, satisfied enough to let worry sit quietly instead of standing in the middle of the room waving both arms. The dog inspects your boots. He finds no crumbs, no meat, no mysterious feast day miracles. His disappointment is dignified and total. The man sets his tool by the door, where meltwater darkens the packed earth floor. A little mud has come in with both of you, but no one fusses. Mud is not an invader here. It is a resident with seasonal habits. The woman places a few more sticks near the hearth, then draws the cooking pot closer. Evening is not near yet, but the day has begun to bend toward it. In winter, light is brief, and every hour seems to carry dusk folded inside. The thaw outside continues in tiny sounds. Drip from the eaves, slide from the thatch, water running along the cleared path somewhere beyond the door. The goat shakes itself and knocks against wood as if reminding the household that imprisonment remains a political issue. Inside, the damp from your sleeves begins to steam faintly. Your skin prickles with returning warmth. You sit where you slept last night and look around with new recognition. The cottage has become known to you in layers. First the doorway and storm, then supper, cellar, roof, neighbours, bedding, night sounds, dreams, wakefulness, morning chores, tracks, spinning, obligations, feast memory, remedies, thaw. Each thing seems separate at first. Now they fold together. The house is not merely a shelter beside a vineyard. It is a small centre where weather, labour, belief, food, illness, debt, memory, animals, and sleep all meet and take turns being urgent. A wooden bowl is passed to you again, this time with a thinner meal, warmed from what remains and stretched for the day. You accept it with both hands. The taste is plain, but the warmth is welcome. You have learned something important about medieval food. Not from a grand banquet, but from repetition. The value of a meal is not only in flavour, it is in timing, heat, sharing, and the assurance that there is still something left to ladle. In many rural households, leftovers were not casual scraps but planned resources. Pottage could be reheated, thickened, thinned, supplemented, and carried across meals. Bread could soften hard edges in broth. Cheese, onions, dried legumes, and preserved foods helped bridge the hungry parts of the year. Winter cooking was a study in extension. Nothing asked. Is this exciting? Everything asked. Can this keep us moving? The child wakes as the food smell strengthens. Very convenient. A small bowl is prepared, softer than yours, and the child eats slowly, still tired but alert enough to notice the dog edging closer. The woman blocks him with one foot without looking. This is not her first negotiation with opportunistic mammals. The man takes a cord and begins repairing a loop used to hang tools or secure something at the shed. His fingers move with less stiffness now, though the wrist still troubles him. He works near the hearth, letting the warmth help the fibres bend. You watch him twist, tie, test, untie and retie. It resembles the vine work outside, the mending inside, the patched roof, the cleared channels. So much of this life is fastening one thing to another and hoping it holds cane to stake, door to frame, cloth to cloth, person to household, household to valley, valley to season. A curious little habit from the world of rural evenings is the telling of weather stories as practical memory. People remembered the year the snow reached the window, the frost that blackened buds, the hail that stripped vines, the thaw that flooded the lower path, the summer when grapes ripened early, the winter when wolves came close, or the Christmas when the road stayed open. These stories were not only entertainment, they were local archives with jokes attached, easier to remember than lists and much better beside a fire. The man tells one now. You catch pieces. A heavy snow years ago, a neighbour who tried to reach the mill and returned without his sack but with a story that improved every time he told it. A donkey involved somehow, which explains the child's sudden interest. The woman corrects the order of events. The man accepts this correction with the noble sorrow of a performer interrupted by truth. The child laughs, coughs once, then laughs again more softly. The room relaxes around that sound. Outside, the day fades earlier than you expect. The clouds draw together again, dimming the valley. Not a full storm, perhaps, but another cold night gathering itself. The snow on the vineyard has crusted where thaw met chill. By morning it may be hard. The tracks you read earlier will blur, freeze, or vanish beneath new frost. The channels cleared on the terraces may keep the water moving for a while, then lock into ice. Everything done today was temporary. That does not make it useless. Temporary work is the main work of being alive. People who examine medieval agriculture often resist simple stories of misery or harmony. Rural life could be harsh, but it was not only suffering. It could be communal, but not always kind. It could be traditional, yet constantly adapting to weather. Markets, rules, family changes, and chance. A vineyard cottage like this holds both discipline and tenderness, burden and skill. The past is rarely a single mood. It is more like this room at dusk, smoky, warm, cramped, funny, worried, and quietly brave. The woman begins to prepare the bedding again. Not fully yet, just gathering what will be needed. A blanket shaken, straw stirred and patted flatter, a cloak shifted away from the damp place near the door. The child's sleeping spot moved slightly closer to warmth. The dog watches the rearrangement with professional attention, already calculating where his body will do the most good for himself and, by coincidence, everyone else. You feel your own tiredness return. It comes not as the sudden heaviness of last night's arrival, but as a deeper, slower knowing. Your body has learned the cottage's rhythm. It knows the smell of the hearth, the scrape of bowls, the sound of roof water, the light falling on smoke, the rough patience of wool. You're not comfortable in the modern sense. Your hip remembers the straw. Your hair is smoky enough to season soup. Your boots are damp still. The thought of lying near the embers no longer feels like surrender. It feels like fitting into the room. The man steps outside one last time before dark. You follow only to the threshold. The valley is blue with evening. Snow lies in bands along the terraces, brighter where the last light catches it, grey where shadows pool. The village below shows small points of fire behind shutters. Smoke rises, then flattens under the cooling air. The church tower is dark, and a bell rings once, slow and low. The sound moves over the fields, over the hidden road, up the vineyard, and into the cottage doorway where you stand. The man looks toward the vines. You do too. They are certain, black, patient. Decades ago they were strange shapes in a storm. Now they seem almost familiar. Like sleeping neighbours you've not yet spoken to but already recognise. Their year was not yours. Yet tonight you understand a little of their waiting. Cut back in winter, bound to stakes, buried in snow, watched for damage, expected to live. A tiny scatter of snow slides from the roof beside you and lands with a soft sigh. The man closes the door. The bar drops. The cottage returns to itself. Inside, the fire has been banked for the coming night. The woman pours a little warm drink, thinner than yesterday's, and passes it round. The child is tucked early. The dog secures his chosen place near your feet with no formal approval. The bedding receives you again, rustling and lumpy and oddly welcome. Wool comes over your shoulders. Smoke stings faintly, then fades into the background. Someone murmurs a prayer, different words from last night, or perhaps the same words shaped by a different tiredness. You lie still. Beyond the wall, the vineyard holds the cold beneath the floor, the cellar holds the stores above you, the roof holds the snow around you. The household holds one another in all the ordinary ways: food, warmth, correction, laughter, work, worry, and the gift of a place beside the embers. The last night in the cottage gathers softly. No grand lesson announces itself, it does not need to. The lesson is in the repaired tie, the saved crumb, the watched child, the counted coin, the cleared channel, the shared cup, the dog's warm weight, the fire kept alive beneath ash. Patience is not passive here. Shelter is not simple. Rest is made by labour, and labour is made bearable by rest. Outside, evening settles over the quiet vines. Inside, you close your eyes, carrying the valley's slow wisdom into sleep. Dawn comes more gently the second time. It does not push you awake with cold shock or the uneasy question of strange tracks beyond the door. It arrives in a slow paling behind the shutter, a soft grey light that gathers on the smoke-dark beams and turns the ash in the hearth the colour of old wool. You wake before anyone speaks, for a few breaths. You remain still, listening to the cottage before it becomes busy. The child breathes evenly. The dog is warm against your feet, heavier than seems reasonable for a creature of his size and moral character. The man lies near the door, one arm outside his blanket, ready even in sleep. The woman is already awake, or nearly so, her eyes open toward the hearth. The fire has not died. Under its cover of ash, red still waits, all night, while snow hardened on the vines and frost silvered the path. That small heat endured. You breathe in. Smoke, wool, straw, cooled wine, damp leather, old earth from the cellar, and the faint herbal ghost of yesterday's remedy. These smells, which seemed so strong when you first crossed the threshold, now feel almost gentle. The cottage has taught your senses its language. Nothing here is clean in a modern, bright, polished way, yet everything carries use. The blanket smells of bodies because it keeps bodies warm. The smoke clings because it has guarded fire. The floor smells of earth because earth is what holds the cottage up. The woman rises first. She wraps wool around her shoulders and kneels by the hearth. A breath, a stir, a patient touch of tinder. Flame returns, small and yellow, then steadier. The man wakes at the sound, lifts his head, and listens as he did yesterday, checking the morning with his whole body. No storm roar, no hard wind, only drips from the eaves and, somewhere outside, a bird calling once from the thawing hedge. The child opens one eye, the dog opens both. Food has been imagined. A little bread is shared, not much, because the day will require saving. Warm liquid is passed around, the taste is thin, smoky, and comforting because comfort, as you have learned, is mostly context wearing a cup. The child eats more strongly than yesterday, still quiet but better. The woman notices and says nothing for a moment, which is how relief sometimes enters a room without wanting attention. The door is opened. This time it gives way more easily. Snow is crusted during the night, and the cleared path remains, glazed with frost in the footprints. Outside, the valley waits under a pale sky. Clouds are lifting beyond the far ridge. The vineyard rows, still white between the dark vines, seem calmer now, no longer lost in storm but held in mourning. Each stake casts a faint blue shadow. The repaired terrace channel has frozen into a thin line of glass. The low wall shows where yesterday's stone slipped. The work remains, but it no longer feels hidden. You step out. Cold comes to meet you, but softly, not friendly exactly. Winter is not suddenly your host, but the air is still, and the light over the valley has a quiet mercy. Smoke rises from the village below in straighter columns. The church tower stands above the roofs, and after a while the bell rings, clear and slow. Its sound crosses the fields and climbs the slope, touching the vineyard, the cottage, the path, and you. In medieval communities, bells often shaped public time more reliably than personal clocks. They called people to worship, marked danger, structured labour, and carried news of death or celebration. This morning, the bell does not announce a grand event. It simply places the day back into shared time. The cottage is not alone. The valley is awake. The world, inconvenient and beautiful, has resumed. You walk a little way down the path, not far, just enough to look back. The cottage crouches against the slope, smoke rising through the pale morning. Its roof is patched with snow and thaw, its walls are stained. Rough. Practical. It will not impress a castle builder. It will not appear in a royal chronicle unless something very strange happens involving the goat, which, honestly, cannot be ruled out. Yet after 2 nights within it, you understand its dignity. It has held people, animals, food, sleep, worry, prayer, jokes, sickness, labour and warmth. It has done what shelter is meant to do. A small sign of old rural devotion catches your eye near the doorway. Perhaps a cross-scratch, perhaps a mark from tools, perhaps only wear from hands over years. Many modest houses carried gestures of protection in their thresholds. Walls, or daily habits, whether through blessings, signs, prayers, or remembered customs. It is difficult now to know exactly what each mark meant, but standing here, after the storm, you understand the impulse. A doorway is not just wood. It is the place where outside becomes inside, where danger is asked to stop, where cold is argued with, where guests enter, where mourning begins. The man comes out carrying a tool. The woman remains at the threshold with the child beside her, wrapped well, watching. The dog pushes between them, then pauses dramatically on the step, surveying his white kingdom. The goat bleats from the shed. The valley, perhaps wisely, does not answer. The man points down toward the village road. Later, someone may go there, perhaps to check on the ill neighbour mentioned by the hearth, perhaps to ask about the mill, or the church, or news from another valley, perhaps to carry word of damage, borrow a tool, or return a basket that has been gone long enough to become part of village folklore. Life is beginning to move outward again. From hearth to path, from path to road, from road to church, mill, manor, and market. The precise balance between isolation and connection in medieval rural life is not easy to pin down. Some valleys were tightly bound by local custom and kinship. Others were deeply connected to wider trade, lordship, pilgrimage, and seasonal labour. A vineyard especially could link a small cottage to distant consumers, merchants, monasteries, taverns, altars, and tax accounts. And the tax. The vines outside may look silent, but they belong to networks reaching far beyond the snow. You look once more over the rows. The vineyard is still asleep, but not empty. Its year waits beneath bark and frozen soil. In time, The snow will melt, the terraces will soften, pruning will continue, ties will be checked, buds will swell, frost will threaten, leaves will open, workers will hoe, carry, sweat, argue, laugh, and curse wasps with conviction. Grapes will form, green at first, then heavy. Harvest will bring neighbours and baskets, sore backs and stained hands, pressing, fermenting, counting, owing, drinking, blessing. Then winter will come again because history's very fond of circles. A bird lands on a vine stake, just as one did yesterday. It shakes itself, looks at you, and flies. You turn back toward the cottage. There is no dramatic farewell. The household has work. You have warmth still lingering in your sleeves and smoke in your hair. The child returns inside. The woman bends to the hearth. The man steps towards the first row. The dog follows him 3 proud paces, then returns to the door, having completed a patrol of exceptional courage. You stand between vineyard and cottage, between White Valley and smoky room, carrying the quiet weight of what you have learned. Medieval rest is not escape from hardship, it is made within hardship, shaped from fire kept under ash, bread softened in broth, wool layered against draughts, stories told over sour wine, prayers whispered when the roof creaks, and hands that rise again when morning asks. The valley brightens, snow loosens from a vine and falls soundlessly to the ground. You take one last breath of cold air, then another of smoke as you step back inside. The door closes gently behind you. The fire waits. The room glows. The story has narrowed now to embers, breath, and light on the floor. And now, as the morning settles softly over the vineyard cottage, let everything become quieter. The storm has passed beyond the far ridge, and the valley no longer asks anything urgent of you. The rows of vines sleep under their thinning quilt of snow. The road below rests in pale curves. The church bell has finished speaking, and its last note drifts away into the white fields like a feather. Inside the cottage, the fire is low but faithful. It does not need to blaze, it only needs to glow. The blankets are folded, the bowls are stacked. The child is warm, the dog has found the best patch of floor, and even the goat, somehow, has accepted the morning for now. The roof holds, the door holds, the walls hold the scent of smoke and wool and bread. You can let the details loosen. The cellar beneath the floor grows dim in memory. The barrels rest, the onions sleep in their basket. The tracks in the snow fade under daylight. The spindle slows, the needle pauses. The terrace channels carry their tiny threads of water away from the vines. All the small labours of the cottage continue without needing you to follow them. Breathe slowly. You're only a guest in this winter valley, and the household has given you what it can: a place near the fire, a shared cup, a rough blanket, and the deep old comfort of shelter while snow moves outside. Let the smoke blur into mist. Let the vines blur into dark lines beneath white. Let the bell become silence. The cottage grows smaller now, warm and far away, a single glowing ember on the snowy hillside. And as the valley softens and the morning light becomes gentle, you may rest there a little longer, safe beside the hearth, drifting quietly, peacefully, almost asleep, sweet dreams.